Look at me when I'm talking to you. You think this is a game? You need to show me some respect.
The fist connected with Jonathan's face with a sickening crack that echoed off the concrete. Blood exploded from his nose, spraying across his cream-colored suit like red paint on canvas. Officer Rick Dawson stood over him, chest-heaving knuckles split open. "That's what you get, boy," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "Coming around here like you own the place."
Is the department under
Jonathan
federal
slowly raised his head, blood streaming down his chin, and smiled a cold, terrifying smile that made Dawson's stomach twist. "Officer," Jonathan said quietly, his voice unnaturally calm, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Before we dive into what happens next, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This story will take you on a journey you won't believe, and I want to hear from you. Comment below what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Trust me, you'll want to stick around until the very end for this one. Jonathan Price checked his watch. 8:45 in the morning, 45 minutes until the ceremony that would officially make him Chicago's new chief of police. 45 minutes until the press conference, the handshakes, the carefully scripted welcome from the mayor. But Jonathan wasn't at City Hall preparing for speeches. He stood across the street from the 9th Precinct, notebook in hand, watching. "You sure about this?" His wife Sarah's voice echoed in his memory from their phone call the night before. "Going undercover on your first-day baby that's asking for trouble." "I need to see the truth," he'd told her. "Not the performance they'll put on when the chief is watching. The real truth." Jonathan adjusted his cream linen suit, straightened his burgundy silk tie. The fabric cost more than most cops made in a week, and that was intentional. He needed to look successful, confident, unthreatening, but undeniable. A black man in America learned early that presentation mattered, that every choice of clothing was a statement, a defense, sometimes a target. He opened his notebook and began writing. An officer exited the precinct, coffee in hand, and shoved past an elderly woman without acknowledging her. The woman stumbled. The officer didn't look back. Jonathan wrote it down. Another officer laughed too loud at his phone, showed the screen to his partner. Both men laughed harder. Jonathan couldn't see what was funny, but he could hear the cruelty in that laughter, the particular sound of men who'd stopped seeing other people as human. He wrote that down too. The 9th Precinct had 47 official complaints filed in the last 2 years. 47 accusations of excessive force, illegal search harassment, discrimination. And not a single one had resulted in discipline stronger than a written warning. That was about to change. A patrol car pulled into the lot and 2 officers climbed out. The first one was huge, over 6 feet, and built like a linebacker who'd traded muscle for fat somewhere around year 15. His uniform strained against his gut, and his face had that weathered, hard quality of someone who'd been angry for so long it had become his default expression. Officer Rick Dawson, 19 years on the force. 23 excessive force complaints, 5 federal civil rights lawsuits settled quietly by the city, and somehow still on the street with a gun and a badge. The second officer was younger, late 20s, with eager eyes and hungry body language. Tyler Briggs, 2 years on the job, already 7 complaints, already learning from the worst possible teacher. Jonathan kept writing, documenting their movements, their postures, the way they surveyed the street like conquerors rather than servants. Then Dawson saw him. Jonathan watched the officer's face change, watched recognition transform into suspicion, transform into aggression in the space of 3 seconds. It was fascinating, really, how predictable it was. A black man in expensive clothes, standing near their precinct, not looking scared or submissive or grateful for their presence. To a man like Dawson, that was provocation enough. "Look at this peacock," Dawson's voice carried across the morning air, rough and contemptuous. "Who the hell does he think he is?" Jonathan didn't look up. He kept writing, documenting the verbal harassment, noting the time, the weather, the growing crowd of morning commuters who slowed to watch. Dawson nudged Briggs. "You see this guy? Probably wearing his rent money. Drug dealer guaranteed. Standing there like he belongs." "Want me to run him?" Briggs asked, eager. "Oh, we're going to do more than run him." They crossed the street, their boots heavy on the pavement, intentionally loud. Jonathan counted their steps. 14 steps from the precinct lot to where he stood. 14 steps to cross the line from observing a citizen to harassing one. He wrote it down. "Morning, officers," Jonathan said without looking up. "Morning." Dawson stopped 3 feet away, too close, deliberately invading space. "You think this is a social call? What are you doing here?" "Observing," Jonathan replied, his voice calm. "It's a public sidewalk. Beautiful morning for it." The words were chosen carefully. Not aggressive, not submissive, just factual. The kind of response that respected law enforcement while asserting constitutional rights. It was exactly the wrong thing to say to a man like Dawson. "Observing." Dawson repeated, his voice dropping into that dangerous register cops use right before things turn physical. "Observing what exactly? You casing our precinct. You one of those cop watcher troublemakers with a YouTube channel." "I'm an interested citizen," Jonathan said, meeting the officer's eyes for the first time. "Concerned about my community." "Your community?" Dawson took another step closer. "This ain't the suburbs, friend. Your kind of community is about 10 miles that way, where you probably drove in from in your BMW. There it was, the casual racism dressed up as geographic observation. Jonathan had heard variations of this speech in a dozen cities from 100 different cops who all thought they were being subtle. "My kind of community," Jonathan repeated softly, making a note in his book. Briggs circled around to Jonathan's left side, and Jonathan saw him pull out his phone, angling it like he was checking messages, but clearly positioning it to record. Good, Jonathan thought. Record everything. Make my case for me. "Officer," Jonathan said, "I haven't broken any laws. I'm standing on a public sidewalk during business hours. If you'd like to have a conversation, I'm happy to cooperate with lawful requests. But what you're doing right now, the intimidation, the invasion of personal space, the implied threats, that's harassment." The silence that followed was electric. Dawson's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise first, because people in this neighborhood didn't usually talk like that, didn't use words like lawful requests and harassment. Then confusion, because the script he was following didn't account for someone who knew the law. Then rage, pure and simple rage, because Jonathan had just called him out in front of his partner and a growing audience of witnesses. "You a lawyer?" Dawson demanded. "I'm a citizen who knows his rights." "You're a smartass is what you are." Dawson's hand drifted toward his belt fingers, tapping near his baton. "And you know what happens to smartasses in my neighborhood." "Your neighborhood," Jonathan noted. Interesting choice of words. I thought police officers were supposed to serve communities, not own them. A woman across the street stopped walking her dog, her hand going to her pocket. 2 teenagers with skateboards paused to watch. A construction worker on a nearby scaffold set down his hammer, leaning against the railing to get a better view. Witnesses, cameras, evidence. Perfect. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Dawson said, his voice shaking now with barely controlled fury. "What are you doing here?" "I'm documenting," Jonathan replied. "Exercising my First Amendment rights. Observing public officials in the performance of their duties. Would you like me to quote the specific Supreme Court cases that establish my right to do so?" Briggs laughed, nervous and mean. "Rick, this guy thinks he's a constitutional scholar." "I don't think anything," Jonathan said. "I know the law. The question is, do you—" That was the moment. The instant when everything shifted from aggressive posturing to inevitable violence. Jonathan saw it in Dawson's eyes, saw the calculation, saw the man decide that words weren't going to work, that this situation required a physical response to restore the natural order of things. A black man in this neighborhood was supposed to be afraid, was supposed to stammer and comply and show the proper respect. Jonathan's refusal to do any of those things was, in Dawson's worldview, a crime that demanded punishment. "Turn around," Dawson ordered. "Hands on the wall." "Am I being detained?" Jonathan asked. "If so, on what grounds?" "You're being detained because I said so. Now turn around before I make you turn around." "Officer Dawson," Jonathan said deliberately, using his name, making it clear this wasn't anonymous, that accountability existed. You don't have probable cause for a detention. You don't have reasonable suspicion that I've committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. What you have is a personal objection to my presence, which isn't a legal standard for detention. A young black woman pulling a shopping cart had stopped to watch her phone out and recording. An older white man in a business suit stood frozen on the corner, his briefcase hanging from his hand, his expression caught between horror and fascination. This was going viral. Jonathan knew it with certainty. The only question was how viral and what the footage would show. "Last chance," Dawson growled. "Turn around or I will put you on the ground." Jonathan closed his notebook slowly. He slipped it back into his jacket pocket, every movement calm and deliberate. He straightened his tie, adjusted his cuffs. "Officer," he said quietly, "I want you to think very carefully about your next action. Because what you do in the next 60 seconds will define the rest of your life. You have an opportunity right now to de-escalate, to walk away, to recognize that I haven't committed a crime, and that continuing this interaction serves no legitimate law enforcement purpose. Take that opportunity." It was good advice, professional advice, the kind of advice Jonathan had given to hundreds of officers during his career in internal affairs and police reform. Dawson didn't take it. He grabbed Jonathan's shoulder and spun him around, slamming him face first into the brick wall of a nearby storefront. The impact rattled Jonathan's teeth, sent a spike of pain through his cheekbone. His hands went up instinctively, palms flat against the rough brick. "You have the right to shut the hell up," Dawson snarled in his ear. "I suggest you use it." Briggs moved in from the other side, and together they began a rough, aggressive pat-down. Their hands weren't professional or measured. This wasn't a search for weapons. This was punishment, humiliation, a physical assertion of dominance. Jonathan took slow, steady breaths. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He simply endured, his mind cataloging every violation, every illegal action, building the case brick by brick. Unlawful detention, check. Excessive force, check. Illegal search without probable cause, check. "Well, well, well," Briggs crowed, pulling Jonathan's wallet from his pocket. He flipped it open, and his voice took on a mocking tone. "Look at all this cash, Rick. Must be $2,000 here. And credit cards, platinum cards." He held one up to the light. "American Express black card. This boy's loaded." "Drug money," Dawson said flatly. "Probably a dealer. That explains the fancy clothes, the attitude, everything." Jonathan's jaw clenched. The automatic criminalization, the lazy assumption that a black man with money must be a criminal, it was infuriating even when it was expected. Especially when it was expected. "Check his jacket," Dawson ordered. Briggs reached into Jonathan's inner pocket and pulled out a leather case. He flipped it open and his voice rose with excitement. "Holy shit! Rick, he's got a badge!" Dawson snatched it from Briggs's hands, examining it with narrowed eyes. For a moment, just a brief moment, Jonathan saw confusion flicker across the officer's face. The badge was real, official, clearly not a toy or a prop. It was a captain's badge from the Los Angeles Police Department, intricately detailed with weight and authenticity. But then the confusion hardened into something worse, defensive certainty. "Impersonating an officer," Dawson announced, his voice rising with triumphant accusation. "That's a federal offense right there. You're done, friend. You are done." "That's my badge," Jonathan said quietly. "From my previous department. It's legal to possess. I'm not impersonating anyone." "Previous department," Dawson mocked. "Right. And I'm the chief of police. You expect me to believe you're a cop? You—" The emphasis on the last word carried everything. The disbelief that someone who looked like Jonathan could hold authority, could be law enforcement, could be anything other than a criminal in expensive clothes. The crowd was growing. Jonathan could hear murmurs, gasps, the clicks and beeps of phones recording. A news van had pulled up at the corner, its satellite dish extending toward the sky like a mechanical flower blooming. This was it. The moment was accelerating toward its inevitable conclusion. "I told you to shut up." Dawson grabbed Jonathan by the shoulder again, yanking him around so they were face to face. "You think you're smart. You think you can come into my neighborhood, in front of my precinct, and disrespect me." "I respect the badge," Jonathan said. "I just don't respect how you're wearing it." Dawson's face went from red to purple. "Rick," Briggs said nervously, "maybe we should just shut up." Dawson snapped at his partner, then to Jonathan. "You want to talk about respect? Let me teach you about respect." He pulled his arm back. Jonathan saw it coming, saw the fist cocking back, saw the weight shifting, saw everything in that strange, slow-motion clarity that happens in moments of violence. He could have blocked it, should have blocked it. He had the training, the reflexes, the muscle memory from 20 years of defensive tactics and hand-to-hand combat training. But he didn't move, because blocking would mean fighting back, and fighting back would muddy the narrative, would give Dawson the excuse he needed to claim self-defense, would turn this from a clear-cut case of police brutality into a both-sides situation. So Jonathan stood there and took it. The punch caught him square on the nose, and the world exploded into white light and red pain. He felt the cartilage crack, felt the blood burst from his nostrils in a hot rush that was immediately everywhere on his face, his tie, his beautiful cream-colored suit that Sarah had helped him pick out. His head snapped back, collided with the brick wall behind him, with a second impact that made his vision blur and his knees buckle. "That's for resisting!" Dawson roared, and Jonathan realized through the haze of pain that the officer was already constructing his narrative, already telling the lie that would justify the violence. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. Briggs was still recording his voice, a breathless rush of fabricated justification. Subject became violent, attempted to assault Officer Dawson, necessary force employed. "I didn't touch you." Jonathan managed his voice thick with blood. He could taste copper, could feel it streaming down his face, soaking into his collar. "Shut up." Dawson grabbed Jonathan's tie, yanking him forward and then slamming him back against the wall again. "You think you're better than me? You think that fancy suit makes you somebody?" Jonathan's head was spinning, but his mind was still working, still cataloging. Assault, battery, excessive force, deprivation of rights under color of law, false arrest, filing a false report. The charges were mounting like a tower, and Dawson was building it brick by brick with his own hands, all captured on a dozen different cameras. "Officer," Jonathan said, spitting blood, "you need to stop right now while you still can." But Dawson was beyond stopping. He was beyond reason. Whatever had been festering inside him for 19 years, the resentment, the rage, the toxic belief in his own untouchable authority, it was all pouring out now, channeled through his fists. He hit Jonathan again this time, a body shot that drove the air from his lungs and sent lightning bolts of pain through his ribs. Jonathan doubled over, gasping, and felt his legs start to give out. A woman in the crowd yelled, "Stop it! He's not fighting back!" A man's voice, "Someone call 911!" Another voice, "They are 911, you idiot!" The crowd was agitated now, angry but also afraid. Afraid to intervene. Afraid to become the next target, trapped by the knowledge that the men with badges and guns were the ones doing the beating. "Check him again," Dawson panted, his voice ragged. "I want everything. Wallet, phone keys. I want to know who this asshole really is." Briggs moved in again, roughly going through Jonathan's pockets with shaking hands. He pulled out Jonathan's phone, the latest iPhone secured with biometric locks. He found Jonathan's keys, just a hotel key card. He pulled out a piece of paper from the inner jacket pocket, folded neatly. "What's this?" Briggs unfolded it, his eyes scanning the official letterhead. And then everything changed. Jonathan watched Briggs's face transform, watched confusion creep in, then concern, then a dawning horror that would have been funny if Jonathan's face wasn't on fire with pain. "Rick," Briggs's voice was small, trembling. "Rick, you need to see this." "What?" Dawson didn't let go of Jonathan, didn't stop pressing him into the wall. "It's a letter from the mayor and the police commissioner." "So what?" Dawson's voice had lost some of its certainty, taking on a sharp edge of worry. "It's an appointment letter," Briggs continued, and now his hand was shaking so badly the paper rattled. "For Chief of Police." The words hung in the morning air like a death sentence. Dawson's grip on Jonathan loosened fractionally. "What did you say?" "The letter. It's dated 3 weeks ago. It's officially appointing someone named Jonathan Price to the position of Chief of Police of the Chicago Police Department, effective immediately. Briggs looked up, his face the color of old milk. Rick, there's a photo ID attached. It's him. It's him. Time seemed to stop. The crowd went silent. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared, normal life continuing while this small corner of the world collapsed in on itself. Jonathan felt Dawson's hands start to tremble against his back, felt the officer take a small step backward, though he didn't fully release him yet. "Let me see that." Dawson's voice was hoarse. He grabbed the letter from Briggs, his eyes scanning it frantically, desperately searching for some indication that it was fake, a forgery, an elaborate prank. But Jonathan knew what he would find. Official seals, embossed signatures, the mayor's personal letterhead. Every detail perfect, because it was real. All of it was real. Jonathan pushed himself off the wall slowly, wiping blood from his face with the back of his hand. His nose was definitely broken. He could feel it displaced wrong. His ribs screamed with every breath. His head throbbed. But underneath the pain was something else, something cold and focused and absolutely certain. "Officer Dawson," Jonathan said, his voice steady despite the blood still flowing from his broken nose. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Step back, put your hands at your sides, and wait for a supervisor to arrive." But Dawson wasn't hearing him. The officer was spiraling, his face cycling through expressions like a slot machine from hell. Denial, terror, rage, desperation. "This isn't real," Dawson whispered. "This is fake. You printed this at Kinko's or something. You think I'm stupid?" "I think you're panicking," Jonathan said, "and I understand why, but making this worse isn't going to help you." "Shut up," Dawson's voice cracked. "You shut your mouth right now. You're under arrest. You're..." And that's when it happened. Officer Rick Dawson, 19-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department, 6 feet 2 inches of muscle and rage and institutional authority, looked down at the letter in his trembling hands, looked at Jonathan's bloody face, looked at the crowd of witnesses and their cameras, and fully understood, completely and irrevocably understood what he had done. His face went white, his mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. And then he pissed himself. It wasn't a little leak. It wasn't subtle. It was a complete catastrophic loss of bladder control, dark stains spreading down the front of his uniform pants, running down his legs, pooling in his boots, visible to everyone within 20 feet. The smell hit the air a second later, acrid and unmistakable. Someone in the crowd laughed, a sharp bark of shocked amusement that broke the tension like a hammer through glass. Then another laugh, and another. Within seconds, the scene had transformed from a tragedy to something else entirely. Not quite comedy. The violence was too fresh, the blood too real, but a kind of cosmic justice that felt almost biblical in its poetry. The bully had been unmade, not with fists, not with violence, but with the simple, devastating power of consequence. "He pissed himself," someone said, awed. "Oh my God, the cop pissed his pants. Are you getting this? Please tell me you're recording this." Briggs stepped back from his partner, his face a mask of horror and betrayal. "Rick! Oh my God, Rick!" Dawson looked down at himself, at the spreading dark stain, at the puddle forming at his feet. Something broke inside him. His face crumpled, his shoulders sagged, the letter dropped from his nerveless fingers, landing in the puddle at his feet. "I didn't know," Dawson whispered. "I swear to God I didn't know." "But you knew I hadn't committed a crime," Jonathan said, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd like a surgical blade. "You knew you didn't have probable cause. You knew the search was illegal. You knew everything you were doing was wrong. The only thing you didn't know was that I could hold you accountable for it." A black SUV screeched to a stop at the curb, and Deputy Chief Maria Castellanos burst out, her face thunderous. She was in full dress uniform, clearly on her way to the welcome ceremony, clearly expecting to arrive at the precinct to find everything perfect, prepared, professional. Instead, she found a nightmare. Her eyes swept the scene in one practiced glance, taking in everything the crowd with their phones: Jonathan's bloody face and ruined suit, Dawson's wet pants and broken expression, the puddle on the sidewalk. "Mother of God," she breathed. "What have you done, ma'am?" Dawson turned to her desperation in every line of his body. "Ma'am, I can explain. He was acting suspicious, and I thought—" Chief Price Castellanos cut him off, her voice formal and strained as she addressed Jonathan directly. Her eyes were wide, her face pale beneath her professional composure. "I am Deputy Chief Maria Castellanos. I am so sorry. I don't have words." Jonathan reached into his jacket. Dawson flinched backward so hard he nearly fell into his own puddle and pulled out another card. His new ID laminated and official with the seal of the Chicago Police Department and his title in raised letters, Chief of Police. "Deputy Chief Castellanos," Jonathan said, his voice calm, despite the blood still flowing freely from his nose. "It's a pleasure to meet you, though not quite under the circumstances either of us anticipated." He glanced at his blood-spattered watch, 9:15. "I believe our formal introduction was scheduled for 9:30. I apologize for arriving early and in such disarray."
TCT.
Castellanos took the ID with trembling hands, verifying what she already knew to be true. Her jaw clenched so tight, Jonathan could see the muscle jumping in her cheek. "Officer Dawson," she said, her voice like ice over razors. "Officer Briggs, you are both suspended from duty effective immediately. You will surrender your weapons and badges to me right now. You will not speak. You will not move except to comply with my orders. You will stand exactly where you are until Internal Affairs arrives to take you into custody." "Ma'am, please," Dawson tried. "Did I give you permission to speak?" Castellanos whirled on him. "Did any part of my order include permission for you to speak?" Dawson's mouth snapped shut. But before anyone could move, a young police officer came running out of the precinct, his face urgent. "Deputy Chief, I just got word there's someone from the mayor's office on the phone asking about Chief Price. They said he was supposed to arrive 10 minutes ago and—" The young officer stopped dead, seeing the scene. Oh no. "Tell the mayor's office that Chief Price has arrived," Castellanos said tightly, "and that there has been an incident requiring immediate attention. Tell them we'll provide a full briefing within the hour." She turned back to Jonathan. "Sir, we need to get you medical attention immediately. I've already called an ambulance." "I appreciate that, Deputy Chief," Jonathan said, and despite the pain, despite the blood, his voice carried absolute authority. "But first I need you to secure this scene. I want every witness interviewed. I want their contact information and copies of any footage they recorded. I want Officer Dawson's and Officer Briggs's body cameras, assuming they were activated, which I strongly suspect they weren't. I want the security footage from the precinct, and I want Internal Affairs here within 30 minutes. "Yes, sir," Castellanos said. Castellanos. "All of that is already in motion." "Good." Jonathan took a breath, winced as his ribs protested. "Deputy Chief, I know this isn't how you planned to start this morning. I know this is a disaster for the precinct's reputation, but I want you to understand something. This—" He gestured at the scene at Dawson standing in his own urine at Briggs, pale and shaking at the crowd with their cameras. "This is not the disaster. This is the revelation. The disaster has been happening for years. Today, we just dragged it into the light where everyone can see it." An ambulance pulled up, sirens wailing, and paramedics rushed toward Jonathan with practiced efficiency. "Sir." The lead paramedic, a young Latina woman with kind eyes, approached carefully. "We need to assess your injuries. Can you tell me where you're hurting?" "Nose is broken," Jonathan said. "Probably a couple of cracked ribs, possible concussion from hitting the wall. But I'm conscious, I'm coherent, and I need 5 more minutes before we go." "Sir, you're bleeding pretty heavily." 5 minutes?" Jonathan repeated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. The paramedic nodded, stepping back but staying close. Jonathan turned to Dawson, who was still standing in his puddle of shame tears, now mixing with the sweat on his face. "Officer Dawson," Jonathan said, and his voice was not kind, but it wasn't cruel either. It was simply factual, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Look at me." Dawson raised his eyes, red-rimmed and desperate. "I want you to remember this moment," Jonathan continued. "I want you to remember exactly how this feels. The fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that your entire world is ending and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Because that's what you did to me. That's what you've been doing to people in this neighborhood for 19 years. And it ends today." "I'm sorry," Dawson croaked. "I'm so sorry." "You're sorry you got caught," Jonathan corrected. "There's a difference. If I had been who you thought I was, just some random citizen you could brutalize without consequences, would you be sorry then? Would you feel remorse for breaking some drug dealer's nose for violating some thug's constitutional rights?" Dawson didn't answer. They both knew the truth. "That's what I thought," Jonathan said. "Deputy Chief, arrest these men. Charge them with felony assault conspiracy, filing a false report, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and whatever else your legal team thinks will stick. I want them in federal custody within the hour." "Yes, sir." Castellanos' voice was hard as granite. She pulled out her handcuffs and approached Dawson. "Hands behind your back, now." As she cuffed him, Dawson started crying in earnest, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. "My pension," he gasped. "My family. I have kids. I have a son. He's at the academy right now. He wants to be a cop just like his dad." Jonathan felt something twist in his chest at that. A son at the academy, dreaming of following in his father's footsteps, having no idea that his father was a corrupt bully who just destroyed everything. But Jonathan's sympathy only went so far. "Then your son is going to learn an important lesson," Jonathan said quietly. "He's going to learn that actions have consequences, that the badge doesn't make you above the law, that being a police officer means serving the community, not terrorizing it. Maybe that lesson will make him a better cop than you ever were." Castellanos moved to Briggs next, cuffing him as well. The younger officer was shaking so hard the cuffs rattled. "I just did what he told me," Briggs whispered. "I was following orders." "And that's going to be your defense?" Jonathan asked. "Following orders. How did that work out at Nuremberg?" Briggs went pale. The paramedics were getting insistent now, and Jonathan's head was starting to swim. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain was becoming hard to ignore. "All right," he said. "Let's go. But I want someone from IA to meet me at the hospital. I want to give my statement while everything is fresh." "Already arranged, sir," Castellanos said. As the paramedics guided Jonathan toward the stretcher, the crowd began to applaud. Slowly at first, then louder, until the entire block was ringing with it. People were cheering, whistling, some crying. The young Latina paramedic leaned close as they lifted him onto the stretcher. "Chief Price," she whispered. "My brother was beaten by cops 3 years ago. Nobody believed him. Nobody cared. The case went nowhere. So thank you. Thank you for what you just did." Jonathan managed to smile despite the pain. "That's why I'm here." As they loaded him into the ambulance, Jonathan took one last look at the scene. Dawson and Briggs stood with their hands cuffed behind their backs, 2 more police cars arriving to transport them. Castellanos was directing her officers with sharp, efficient commands. The crowd was still recording, still watching, still bearing witness. And standing on the scaffolding across the street, the construction worker who'd been watching the whole thing gave Jonathan a slow, respectful nod. Just as Jonathan thought. Messy, painful public justice. The ambulance doors closed, and the siren began its wail. Jonathan closed his eyes, letting the paramedics work, feeling the ambulance accelerate through the Chicago streets. His first day as chief of police was supposed to have been a ceremony, handshakes and speeches, and carefully choreographed photo opportunities. Instead, it had been blood and violence, and a public unmasking of everything wrong with the system he'd been hired to fix. But as the pain medication the paramedic administered began to kick in, as the sharp edges of his injuries softened into a dull ache, Jonathan felt something unexpected. Hope. Real, genuine hope. Because now he had something more valuable than a smooth transition or a friendly welcome. He had proof. Undeniable, viral, recorded from every angle proof of exactly what was broken. And with that proof came the mandate he needed to fix it. The department couldn't hide anymore. Couldn't minimize, couldn't spin, couldn't quietly settle and move on. The whole world had watched one of their officers brutalize their new chief of police in broad daylight. The whole world had watched that officer lose control of his bladder when he realized what he'd done. There would be no tolerance for half measures now, no patience for incremental reform. The fire had been lit, and Jonathan was going to use it to burn away the rot completely. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Sarah. The paramedic retrieved it for him, and he saw a text. "I'm watching the news. I'm on the next flight. I love you." Jonathan smiled, pain and all. "Sir," the paramedic said gently, "your nose is definitely broken. We're going to need to reset it. This is going to hurt." "Do it," Jonathan said. She did. The pain was extraordinary, a white-hot spike that made his previous injuries feel like a massage. Jonathan gritted his teeth and didn't make a sound. When it was over, she looked at him with something like awe. "You're tough, Chief." "No," Jonathan corrected, his voice rough. "I'm necessary. There's a difference." The ambulance pulled into the hospital, and a swarm of staff rushed to meet them. As they wheeled Jonathan inside, he caught sight of a television in the waiting room. His face was on every channel. The footage was everywhere, and the headlines were writing themselves, "New police chief brutalized on first day. Cop pisses pants after assaulting his own boss. Chicago officer arrested for beating new chief." It was viral. It was national. It was exactly what needed to happen. As the hospital staff surrounded him checking vitals and preparing for x-rays, Jonathan allowed himself one moment of satisfaction. Rick Dawson had thought he was punishing an uppity black man who didn't know his place. Instead, he'd just handed the keys to the kingdom to the one person who knew exactly how to use them. The revolution would begin in a hospital room with a broken nose and cracked ribs and a suit stained with blood. But it would begin, and it would not stop until everything changed. The emergency room doctor was a short Indian man with tired eyes and steady hands. He pressed gently around Jonathan's nose, and Jonathan had to fight not to pull away from the pain. "Definitely broken," Dr. Patel said. "Clean break, though. Could have been worse. You're lucky he didn't shatter the orbital bone. That would have required surgery." "Lucky," Jonathan repeated the word, tasting bitter. He was lying on a hospital bed, his cream suit jacket folded on a chair, his shirt front crusted with dried blood. "That's one way to look at it." "The ribs are bruised, not broken," Patel continued, prodding Jonathan's side. "You'll be sore for a few weeks, but nothing that won't heal. The concussion is mild. I want to keep you for observation for a few hours, but you should be fine to go home tonight." "I'm not going home," Jonathan said. "I have a press conference in 3 hours. Patel looked at him like he was insane. "Sir, you were just assaulted. You need rest." "What I need," Jonathan said, sitting up despite the protest from his ribs, "is to control the narrative before someone else does it for me." The door burst open, and Deputy Chief Castellanos entered, followed by 2 men in expensive suits. One was white, mid-50s, with silver hair and a politician's smile that didn't reach his eyes. The other was black, younger, maybe 40, with sharp features and the intense focus of someone who never missed a detail. "Chief Price," the white man said, extending his hand. "I'm Mayor Richard Harding. I cannot tell you how sorry I am about what happened this morning." Jonathan shook his hand, noting the mayor's grip was firm, but not aggressive, practiced, but not genuine. This was a man who'd shaken 10,000 hands and meant none of them. "And this is Marcus Webb," the mayor continued, gesturing to the other man. "Our city attorney. He's already begun preparing our legal response." "Legal response," Jonathan repeated. "Interesting choice of words, Mr. Mayor. Not apology or reform. Legal response." The mayor's smile tightened. "Chief Price, I assure you we take this incident extremely seriously. Officer Dawson and Officer Briggs are already in federal custody. We're cooperating fully with the investigation." "Of course you are," Jonathan said, "because half the country watched it happen on their phones. What choice do you have?" Castellanos cleared her throat. "Sir, Internal Affairs is waiting outside. They need your statement." "Good." Jonathan swung his legs off the bed, ignoring Dr. Patel's protest. "Let's get this over with." The IA investigators were a man and a woman, both in their late 30s, both carrying the particular wariness that came from spending your career investigating other cops. The man was tall and angular with a military haircut. The woman was shorter, stockier, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Chief Price," the man said, "I'm Lieutenant Frank Morrison, Internal Affairs. This is Sergeant Jennifer Chen. We need to take your formal statement regarding this morning's incident." "Before we start," Jonathan said, "I want to make something clear. This investigation doesn't stop with Dawson and Briggs. I want to know who trained them, who supervised them, who reviewed their complaint files and decided 19 years of misconduct was acceptable. I want to know the entire chain of command that allowed this culture to exist." Morrison and Chen exchanged glances. "Sir," Morrison said carefully, "that's a much broader investigation than—" "Than what?" Jonathan interrupted. "Then two bad apples, Lieutenant. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've cleaned up 3 departments. I know how this works. Dawson and Briggs aren't anomalies. They're symptoms. And I want the disease identified and cut out." "That could take months," Chen said. "That could implicate dozens of officers." "Good," Jonathan said flatly. "Then we better get started." For the next 90 minutes, Jonathan recounted every detail of the morning, every word Dawson had said, every illegal action, every violation. Morrison and Chen recorded everything, their expressions growing grimmer with each passing minute. "The thing is," Jonathan said, reaching the end of his statement, "Dawson made a calculation this morning. He saw a black man in expensive clothes standing near his precinct, and he calculated that he could harass me, search me, assault me, and face 0 consequences. That calculation was based on 19 years of experience that proved him right, 19 years of getting away with it. The only thing that changed this morning was that I had the power to hold him accountable. But how many people didn't have that power? How many people did he brutalize who couldn't fight back?" "We'll find out," Morrison said quietly. "I promise you that, Chief." A nurse knocked on the door. "Chief Price, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your wife." Jonathan's face softened for the first time since the morning began. "Send her in." Sarah Price burst through the door like a storm, her face a mixture of fury and relief and love. She was 51 years old, a pediatrician, and the strongest person Jonathan had ever met. She'd supported him through 3 department transfers, through death threats and late nights, and the constant weight of trying to fix broken systems. "Jonathan Michael Price," she said, her voice shaking, "when I said you should make a good first impression, this is not what I meant." Then she was holding him carefully, avoiding his ribs, her face pressed against his chest. Jonathan wrapped his arms around her and let himself have this moment, this small pocket of safety and love in the middle of the chaos. "I'm okay," he murmured into her hair. "I'm okay, baby." "Your nose is crooked," she said, pulling back to look at him, "and you have a black eye forming. And don't think I don't notice you're holding your ribs. Could have been worse. Could have been better," she shot back. "Could have been you arriving at City Hall in a nice suit instead of a hospital bed." "Where's the drama in that?" Jonathan tried to smile, winced as it pulled at his swollen lip. Sarah turned to the mayor, and her expression went cold. "Mayor Harding, I hope you understand that my husband just gave your city a gift. He exposed a cancer in your police department that's been growing for decades. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Harding looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Price, I assure you." "Don't assure me of anything." Sarah cut him off. "Show me. Show my husband. Show the country that's watching right now. Because if you think you can sweep this under the rug, if you think you can sacrifice 2 officers and call it a day, you're wrong. Jonathan didn't come here to be your token reform chief. He came here to burn down everything that's broken and build it back right. So the question is, are you going to help him or get in his way?" The room was silent. The mayor looked like he'd been slapped. Castellanos was trying not to smile. Morrison and Chen were openly staring at Sarah with something approaching awe. Jonathan loved his wife more in that moment than he ever had before. "Mrs. Price," the mayor said, finally recovering his composure, "I give you my word that we will support Chief Price in whatever reforms he deems necessary. Your word, Sarah said. We'll see what that's worth. Dr. Patel returned, looking harassed. Chief Price, I really must insist you rest. Your blood pressure is elevated. I'm showing signs of having been beaten up this morning, Jonathan said, which I have been. But I'm also about to do the most important press conference of my career, so unless you're going to physically restrain me, I'm leaving, Patel sighed. At least let me give you something for the pain. Nothing that will make me drowsy, Jonathan said. I need to be sharp. Ibuprofen it is, Patel muttered, pulling out a prescription pad. 30 minutes later, Jonathan stood in front of a mirror in a private hospital room examining himself. His nose was swollen and crooked, held in place by a splint. His left eye was purpling the bruise spreading across his cheekbone. His lip was split and swollen. He looked like a man who'd been in a fight, which was perfect. You sure about this? Castellanos asked. She'd stayed while the others left to prepare for the press conference. Sir, no one would blame you for taking a few days. The footage speaks for itself. The footage shows what happened, Jonathan said, buttoning a fresh shirt that someone had brought from his hotel. But I need to explain what it means. I need to frame this correctly before Fox News turns Dawson into a victim and me into an aggressor who provoked an honest cop. They wouldn't dare. They absolutely would, Jonathan said. I've seen it 100 times. He should have just complied. He was acting suspicious. The officer felt threatened. I'm not giving them that narrative. I'm taking control of this story right now. His phone had been buzzing non-stop for the past hour. He finally looked at it. 247 missed calls, 412 text messages. His email inbox had over 1,000 unread messages. And the videos. Dear God, the videos. Jonathan scrolled through Twitter, through Facebook, through Instagram. The footage was everywhere, shared millions of times, trending worldwide. The hashtags were already established: Justice for Price, Chief Price Reform. Now Dawson pissed himself. That last one was trending #1 globally. The internet is having a field day, Castellanos said, looking over his shoulder. There are already memes. She showed him her phone. Someone had edited Dawson's face onto a baby in diapers. Another showed Dawson running away with a wet stain captioned, "When you realize you assaulted your boss." A third was a side-by-side comparison of Dawson's tough guy stance at the beginning of the video and his wet pants at the end, captioned, "How it started versus how it's going." Jonathan felt a complicated mixture of satisfaction and pity. Dawson deserved consequences, deserved prison, deserved to lose everything he'd misused. But this level of public humiliation was almost cruel in its totality. Almost. Good, Jonathan said finally. Let them make jokes. Let Dawson become a punchline. Maybe the next cop thinking about abusing his authority will remember how this ended and think twice. A young aide from the mayor's office appeared at the door looking nervous. Chief Price, we're ready for you. The press room is packed. Every major network is here. We've got international media. This is huge, sir. Then let's not keep them waiting, Jonathan said. City Hall's press room was designed to hold about 50 people comfortably. Someone had crammed in over 200. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights glowing like demon eyes. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, notebooks out phones, recording the collective energy of the room, crackling with anticipation. Jonathan walked to the podium, and the room erupted. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, a wall of sound that was almost physical in its intensity. He stood there silent, letting them see him, letting them capture every angle of his bruised face, his crooked nose, his split lip, letting the image burn itself into the national consciousness. Finally, he raised his hand, and the room gradually quieted. My name is Jonathan Price. He began, his voice clear and strong. I am the chief of police for the city of Chicago. This morning was supposed to be my first official day. I was supposed to arrive at this very building at 9:30 for a welcome ceremony. Instead, I arrived at the hospital at 9:15, bleeding from a broken nose and possible cracked ribs. He paused, letting that sink in. I want to tell you exactly what happened, and more importantly, why it happened. At 8:45 this morning, I positioned myself across the street from the 9th Precinct. I was conducting what we call a cold observation, watching the precinct and its officers in their natural state before they knew their new chief was watching. This is something I've done in every department I've worked with because you can't reform what you can't see clearly." Another pause. He could see the reporters scribbling frantically, could see the camera operators adjusting their angles to get better shots of his injuries. At approximately 8:52, officers exited the precinct. Officer Rick Dawson and Officer Tyler Briggs. They saw me, a black man in expensive clothes, standing near their precinct. And they made a calculation. They calculated that I was someone they could harass, someone they could intimidate, someone they could search illegally, and ultimately, someone they could assault without facing consequences. Jonathan's voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard as diamonds. That calculation was not random. It was not spontaneous. It was based on 19 years of Officer Dawson making similar calculations and being proven right. 19 years of excessive force complaints that went nowhere. 19 years of illegal searches that were never punished. 19 years of a system that looked the other way, while officers like Dawson brutalized the communities they were supposed to serve. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Chief Price, do you believe this was racially motivated?" "I believe," Jonathan said carefully, "that Officer Dawson saw a black man who didn't show sufficient fear or deference, and his response was violence. You can call that whatever you want. I call it unacceptable." Another reporter. "What happens now to the officers involved?" "Officer Dawson and Officer Briggs are currently in federal custody," Jonathan said. "They face multiple felony charges, including assault, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, filing false reports, and conspiracy. The U.S. Attorney's Office is handling the prosecution. I expect they will be convicted, and I expect they will serve significant prison time." "Chief Price," a male reporter called out, "there's already commentary suggesting you provoked this confrontation, that you deliberately put yourself in a situation where—" "Where what?" Jonathan interrupted, his voice sharp. "Where I stood on a public sidewalk, where I exercised my First Amendment rights, where I existed as a black man in an expensive suit. Which of those actions exactly justifies being assaulted by police officers?" The reporter had the grace to look embarrassed. "Let me be absolutely clear," Jonathan continued. "I did not provoke anything. I stood on a sidewalk and observed a precinct. That is not a crime. It does not justify detention, search, or assault. And the fact that some people think it does is exactly why we need reform." Sarah stood at the side of the room, her arms crossed, her eyes fierce with pride. Next to her, Mayor Harding looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Good, let him be uncomfortable. Let him understand that the easy path, the path of covering up and moving on, was closed. "But here's what I want people to understand," Jonathan said, his voice softening slightly. "This morning I had the power to hold my attackers accountable. I have legal knowledge, political connections, and the authority of this office. Most people don't have those advantages. Most people who are brutalized by police have no recourse, no platform, no voice. Their videos don't go viral. Their stories don't make national news. They suffer in silence, and the system continues unchanged." He leaned forward, his hands gripping the podium. "That ends today. I am launching a complete top-to-bottom audit of the Chicago Police Department, starting with the 9th Precinct. Every complaint filed in the last 10 years will be reviewed by an independent panel. Every use of force report will be examined. Every officer with multiple complaints will face review. We will identify the culture that produced officers like Dawson, and we will dismantle it piece by piece." The room erupted with questions, voices overlapping in a cacophony. "Chief Price, how long will this take? Are you planning to fire more officers? What about the police union? How do you respond to critics who say this is an overreaction?" Jonathan held up his hand again. "I know many people both in this city and across the country are watching to see if this moment leads to real change or just empty promises. I want to tell you exactly what change looks like." He pulled out a folded document from his jacket pocket. His hands shook slightly, whether from pain or adrenaline or emotion he wasn't sure. Effective immediately, every officer in the Chicago Police Department will undergo mandatory de-escalation training. not a one-day seminar, not a video they watch online. Real intensive training on how to resolve situations without violence. He unfolded the document, his action plan, the blueprint he'd been refining for months. Effective immediately, we are implementing a duty to intervene policy. Officers are now legally and professionally required to stop misconduct by their colleagues. Silence is no longer neutral. Silence is complicity. A murmur ran through the room. Effective immediately, we are establishing a civilian review board with real power, not advisory power, but actual authority to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. The police cannot investigate themselves anymore. That system has failed. He could see Mayor Harding shifting uncomfortably. They hadn't discussed these specifics. Too bad, this wasn't a negotiation. And finally, Jonathan said, his voice rising, effective immediately, we are reopening every excessive force complaint filed in the last decade that was dismissed or resolved internally. Because I don't believe those complaints were false. I believe they were ignored. And every victim of police brutality in this city deserves to have their case heard. The room exploded. Reporters were shouting, cameras flashing, the energy chaotic and electric. Chief Price. A woman's voice cut through the noise. Do you think you can actually accomplish all of this? Jonathan looked directly at her, then swept his gaze across the room, across the cameras that were broadcasting this moment to millions of people. Ma'am, he said quietly, this morning 2 police officers felt comfortable enough in their immunity to assault their own chief of police in broad daylight in front of witnesses on camera. They believed correctly, based on years of experience, that they could get away with it. The only thing that changed was that I had the power to prove them wrong. But the culture that gave them that confidence, that culture has to die, and I will kill it or I will die trying. The silence that followed was profound. Then from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined in until half the room was applauding. The journalists who were supposed to remain neutral were openly showing their support. Jonathan stepped back from the podium, his ribs screaming, his head pounding, his entire body demanding rest. But he wasn't done yet. One more thing, he said, and the room quieted again. I've seen the videos online. I've seen the memes about Officer Dawson, about his loss of control. And I want to say something about that. He took a breath, choosing his words carefully. Officer Dawson humiliated himself this morning. He destroyed his career, his reputation, his freedom. And yes, the manner in which he realized what he'd done was memorable. But I don't want that to be the story. I don't want this to become a joke that everyone laughs at and then forgets. Because the real story isn't that one cop pissed his pants. The real story is that hundreds of cops across this country abuse their authority every single day and face no consequences. Dawson is only different because he got caught, because his victim had power. That's the story that matters. He stepped away from the podium fully this time, and Castellanos moved to escort him out. But before he could leave, a young black reporter in the third row stood up. Chief Price, the young man said, his voice cracking slightly. My name is Marcus Johnson. I'm with the Chicago Tribune. 5 years ago, I was stopped by police for fitting a description. They threw me against a car, searched me illegally, and when I protested, they arrested me for resisting. The charges were eventually dropped, but I have that arrest on my record. It's affected job applications, housing applications, everything. And when I tried to file a complaint, I was told there was no evidence to support my claim. The young man's eyes were wet. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for believing us. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being willing to take a beating to prove that we matter. Jonathan felt his own throat tighten. Mr. Johnson, send your complaint information to my office. We'll review it properly this time. And if those officers violated your rights, they will face consequences, even if it's 5 years late. As he left the press room, Sarah fell into step beside him, taking his hand. You did good, she whispered. I did the bare minimum, Jonathan said. I told the truth. That shouldn't be revolutionary. They walked through the corridors of City Hall, and Jonathan noticed something. People were stopping, staring. Staff members, city workers, police officers. Some looked hostile, others looked hopeful, a few looked terrified. But they all looked. A young female officer approached, her eyes red like she'd been crying. She was maybe 25, her uniform crisp, her movements nervous. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted to say my training officer, he tells me to look the other way when his partner gets rough with suspects. He says that's the code, that cops protect cops no matter what. And I've been doing it even though I know it's wrong because I'm afraid of being labeled a rat. But after seeing what happened to you, after hearing what you said, I can't do it anymore. I can't be part of this." Jonathan stopped facing her fully. "What's your name, officer?" "Rivera," she said. "Melissa Rivera." "Officer Rivera, how long have you been on the force?" 11 months, sir." "And in those 11 months, how many times have you witnessed misconduct?" Rivera hesitated, fear warring with honesty on her face. Then, 7 times, sir, that I can document, probably more that I missed." "And you reported none of them because you were afraid?" "Yes, sir." Jonathan reached into his pocket and pulled out his card. "Officer Rivera, I'm going to give you my direct number. When you witness misconduct, not if, when I want you to call me immediately, you will be protected, you will be supported, and you will not face retaliation. Do you understand?" Rivera took the card with trembling hands. "Sir, the union will come after me. My fellow officers will freeze me out. My career." "Your career will be whatever you make it," Jonathan said. "You can spend the next 30 years looking the other way, protecting bad cops and becoming one yourself. Or you can be part of the generation that fixes this. The choice is yours, but if you choose the second path, I will have your back." Rivera nodded, clutching the card like it was a lifeline. "Thank you, sir." As she walked away, Sarah squeezed Jonathan's hand. "You can't save them all," she said gently. "I can try," Jonathan replied. They reached the car, and Jonathan eased himself into the back seat, every movement a negotiation with his injured body. The driver, a young officer named Chen, who'd been assigned as his temporary security, kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror with undisguised awe. "Where to, Chief?" Chen asked. "The 9th Precinct," Jonathan said. Castellanos, who'd gotten in the front seat, turned around. "Sir, are you sure you need rest? The precinct can wait until—" "The precinct can't wait," Jonathan interrupted. "Right now, everyone there is wondering what happens next. They're scared, they're angry, they're forming narratives. I need to get in front of that. I need to address them directly before the union does it for me." Sarah sighed. "Jonathan, you're exhausted. You're injured. You've already done a press conference. Can't you—" "No," he said simply. "I can't." The drive to the 9th Precinct took 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which Jonathan closed his eyes and tried to center himself, tried to find the energy for what came next. His phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered anyway. "Price." "Chief Price, this is Captain Tom Sullivan, President of the Fraternal Order of Police." The voice was gruff-aggressive. "We need to talk about what you said at that press conference." "Captain Sullivan, what can I do for you?" "You can back off this witch hunt you're planning," Sullivan said bluntly. "You're talking about investigating thousands of cases, interrogating officers, destroying careers based on complaints that have already been resolved. This is going to destroy morale. This is going to make it impossible for our officers to do their jobs." Jonathan's voice went cold. "Captain Sullivan, 2 of your officers assaulted me this morning, on camera, in front of dozens of witnesses, and your concern is morale. With all due respect, Chief, what happened to you was wrong. Nobody's defending Dawson, but you're using one bad incident to paint the entire department as corrupt. That's not fair." "One bad incident," Jonathan repeated slowly. "Captain, the 9th Precinct alone has 47 excessive force complaints in 2 years. The department as a whole has over 300. How many bad incidents does it take before we acknowledge a systemic problem?" "Those complaints are mostly bullshit," Sullivan shot back. "People lie. Criminals lie. They file complaints to get out of charges to sue the city to cause trouble. You know this. You've been a cop long enough to—" "I've been a cop long enough to know when I'm being fed bullshit. Jonathan interrupted. "And right now, Captain, you're testing my patience. The reforms are happening. The investigations are happening. You can either support them or obstruct them, but they are happening. Are we clear?" Sullivan's voice dropped to a growl. "You're making enemies, Chief. Powerful enemies. The Union represents 10,000 officers in this city. You might want to think about that." "Is that a threat, Captain?" "It's a reality check." "Then let me give you one in return," Jonathan said. "I don't work for you. I don't work for the Union. I work for the citizens of Chicago, and they just watched your officers beat up their police chief. So if you think you can intimidate me, if you think you can protect the kind of cops who put me in the hospital, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson. Good day, Captain Sullivan." He hung up. Sarah was staring at him. "That's going to cause problems." "Good," Jonathan said. "Let them come." The 9th Precinct appeared ahead, its brutal architecture, somehow more ominous now that Jonathan knew what festered inside. A crowd had gathered outside protesters, mostly holding signs. "Justice for Price." "Fire them all." "No more killer cops." But there was a counter-protest, too smaller, but vocal. "Blue Lives Matter." "Support our police." "Don't let one bad apple spoil the bunch." Chen navigated through the crowd carefully, and they pulled into the precinct lot. Officers were everywhere, gathered in clusters, their conversations stopping as Jonathan's car appeared. He stepped out, and the pain made him pause for a moment. His ribs were screaming, his head was pounding, the ibuprofen had worn off, but he stood straight, walked steady, and headed for the entrance. Inside the precinct had gone silent. Officers lined the hallways, watching him. Their faces showed everything: anger, fear, respect, resentment, hope. No one spoke. Jonathan walked to the main briefing room where Castellanos had gathered the entire day shift. 60 officers, all in uniform, all staring at him with varying levels of hostility. He stepped to the front of the room, gripped the podium, and looked at them. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "You're thinking that I'm here to destroy you, that I'm on a crusade, that I'm using what happened to me as an excuse to tear down everything you've built." Silence. "You're right," Jonathan continued. "I am here to tear things down, but not all things, not the good things, not the officers who do this job with honor and integrity and genuine desire to serve. I'm here to tear down the culture that protected Rick Dawson for 19 years. I'm here to tear down the system that let him brutalize God knows how many people without consequences. I'm here to tear down the code of silence that made officers like Tyler Briggs think they had to participate in illegal acts to be accepted." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "Some of you in this room are good cops. Maybe most of you. You show up, you do your job, you treat people with respect. And you're pissed right now because you think I'm lumping you in with Dawson. But here's the thing, if you knew what Dawson was, if you saw him cross the line and said nothing, if you covered for him, or looked the other way, or just stayed quiet, because that's the code, then you're part of the problem too." A murmur ran through the room, angry and defensive. "I don't expect you to like me," Jonathan said. "I don't need you to like me, but you will respect the badge I wear and the changes I implement, or you will find employment elsewhere. This is not a negotiation. This is not a debate. This is the reality of the Chicago Police Department going forward." An older officer in the back stood up. He was in his 50s with a thick mustache and cold eyes. "Chief Price, with all due respect, you've been here one day, and you think you understand this precinct? You think you understand what we deal with on these streets?" "Sergeant," Jonathan waited for the name. "Kowalski." "Sergeant Kowalski, you're right. I don't understand everything about this precinct yet. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to you. But I do understand corruption. I understand abuse of power. I understand what happens when good cops stay silent while bad cops run wild. I've seen it in 3 other cities, and I fixed it in 3 other cities. Chicago will be no different." "You can't fix what ain't broke," another officer muttered, not quite under his breath. Jonathan's eyes locked on him. "Officer, what's your name?" The officer, young white, with a cocky smirk, stood up. "Jameson, sir." "Officer Jameson, do you think Rick Dawson breaking my nose this morning is evidence of a system that's working correctly?" "With respect, sir, that was one guy having a bad day. 19 years of bad days, Jonathan shot back. 47 complaints, 5 federal lawsuits, all ignored, all swept under the rug. If that's your definition of not broke, then we have very different standards. Jameson sat down, his smirk gone. Let me make something very clear. Jonathan continued, his voice hardening. The reforms I announced today are happening. The audits are happening. The investigations are happening. Officers who have committed misconduct will face consequences. Officers who witness misconduct and report it will be protected and rewarded. And officers who try to obstruct these reforms will be fired. Those are your options. Choose wisely. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. I know some of you are scared right now. Scared that old complaints are going to resurface. Scared that things you did years ago, things you thought were buried, are going to come back. If you're feeling that fear, I want you to listen carefully. The room was dead silent. If you committed misconduct, real misconduct, brutality, illegal searches, planting evidence, whatever, and you come forward voluntarily in the next 30 days, I will show some leniency. Not immunity, not a free pass, but leniency. If you wait for us to find you, if you make us dig it out, you get the full weight of consequences. This is your chance to get right with yourselves and this department. Take it. He walked out of the briefing room, leaving 60 stunned officers in his wake. Castellanos caught up with him in the hallway. Sir, that was intense. It needed to be, Jonathan said. They needed to know this is real. Half of them hate you now. Better than all of them ignoring me. They reached his temporary office, and Jonathan sank into the chair behind the desk, finally letting the exhaustion show. Sarah had followed them, and now she moved behind him, her hands gently massaging his shoulders. You're running on fumes, baby. You need to rest. I will, he promised. Soon. There was a knock on the door. A young officer poked his head in. Chief, there's a woman outside asking to speak with you. She says she was a witness this morning. Jonathan's exhausted brain took a moment to process. Send her in. The woman who entered was in her 60s, black with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly. Chief Price, my name is Dorothy Washington. I was walking my dog this morning when I saw what those officers did to you. I remember you, Jonathan said. You were recording. Yes, sir? Dorothy's eyes were wet. I wanted to tell you what you did today, what you're trying to do. My grandson was killed by police 3 years ago. He was 17 years old. They said he had a gun. He didn't. They said he was reaching for something. He wasn't. They shot him 8 times and nobody was ever charged. Nobody even lost a day of work. Her voice broke. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to care, for someone with power to say that my grandson's life mattered. And today, watching you stand up there with your broken nose and your bruised face, talking about reopening old cases, I felt hope for the first time since I buried my baby. Jonathan stood, moved around the desk, and took Dorothy's hands in his. What was your grandson's name? Marcus, she said. Marcus Washington. Mrs. Washington, I want you to send me everything you have on Marcus's case. Every document, every police report, every witness statement. We're going to review it properly. And if those officers violated his rights, if they murdered your grandson, they will face justice, even if it's 3 years late. Dorothy collapsed into his arms, sobbing. Sarah moved to support them both, and the 3 of them stood there in that ugly office in that broken precinct, holding on to each other and the fragile possibility that things might actually change. When Dorothy finally left, promising to send everything to his office, Jonathan sat back down and put his head in his hands. I can't save them all, he whispered. No, Sarah said gently, but you can try, and that's more than anyone else has done. His phone buzzed. A text from Morrison, the IA investigator. Chief, we found something. Dawson and Briggs had a private group chat. 200 officers involved. You need to see this. Jonathan looked at the message, then at Sarah. It's going to get worse before it gets better, she said. You know that, right? I know, he said. And you're still going to do this. I don't have a choice, baby. If not me, who? If not now, when? Sarah leaned down and kissed his forehead, careful of his bruises. "Then I'm with you, every step of the way. Even when I'm too stubborn for my own good? Especially then." Jonathan smiled, really smiled for the first time all day. Then he stood his body protesting every movement and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked. "To see what Morrison found," Jonathan said. "If there's a group chat with 200 officers sharing misconduct, I need to know everything." "Jonathan, it's almost midnight. You've been awake for 20 hours. You were beaten this morning. Please, just rest." "I'll rest when this is done," he said, and walked out into the night, into the fight he'd chosen, into the war that would define everything that came next. The revolution had begun. Morrison's office was in the basement of police headquarters, a windowless room that smelled like stale coffee, and the particular desperation of people who spent their careers investigating their own. When Jonathan arrived at 11:45 that night, Morrison and Chen were both there, surrounded by printouts and laptops, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of computer screens. "Chief," Morrison said, standing up. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up. "You should have gone home. This could have waited until morning." "Show me what you found," Jonathan said, pulling up a chair despite his body's screaming protest. Sarah had stayed at the hotel, finally accepting that her husband was going to work himself into the ground, no matter what she said. Chen handed him a tablet. "We executed a warrant for Dawson's and Briggs's phones about 2 hours ago. What we found was a private messaging group called Street Justice. 217 active members, all Chicago PD. And Chief, the things they've been sharing, it's worse than we thought." Jonathan scrolled through the messages, and with each swipe, his jaw clenched tighter. Photos of suspects with visible injuries captioned with jokes about resisting arrest. Videos of illegal searches set to comedy sound effects, memes mocking civilians who filed complaints. And worse, much worse, coordinated discussions about how to cover up misconduct, how to align stories, how to discredit witnesses. "This isn't just a few bad apples," Jonathan said quietly. "This is an organized conspiracy." "It gets worse," Morrison said. He pulled up another screen. "They've been tracking activists, documenting people who film police encounters, sharing personal information about civilians they consider troublemakers. Chief, this is stalking, this is intimidation, this is textbook RICO." Jonathan felt his hands shaking, not from fear but from rage, so pure it was almost cleansing. "How far back do these messages go?" 4 years, Chen said. "We're still analyzing all of it, but from what we can see, this group has been operational since 2021. And Chief, the members aren't just patrol officers. There are sergeants in here, lieutenants, at least 3 captains. "Names," Jonathan demanded. "I want every name." Morrison hesitated. "Sir, if we move on this too fast, if we arrest 200 officers at once, the department will collapse. We won't have enough personnel to patrol the city. The union will file immediate injunctions. The mayor will support us or find a new police chief," Jonathan interrupted. "And as for the department collapsing, maybe it needs to. Maybe we need to burn it down completely and rebuild from scratch." "Chief Price," Chen said carefully, "I understand the impulse, but logistically—" "I don't care about logistics right now," Jonathan said. "I care about justice. These officers have been operating like a criminal gang inside our own department. They've violated people's rights, destroyed evidence, coordinated false testimony. And you want me to move slowly because it might be inconvenient." Morrison and Chen exchanged glances. Morrison spoke first. "Sir, I've been doing IA work for 12 years. I've seen corruption, I've seen cover-ups, but I've never seen anything this organized, this widespread. If we're going to prosecute this, we need to be surgical. We need to identify the ringleaders, flip the peripheral members, build an ironclad case." "How long?" Jonathan asked. 6 months minimum, maybe a year." "Unacceptable. Chief?" "I said unacceptable." Jonathan's voice rose. "Every day we wait is another day. These officers are on the street with badges and guns. Another day they can destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, coordinate their stories. We move now, we move hard, and we move publicly." Chen pulled up another file. "Chief, there's something else you need to see. We found messages about you specifically. From 3 days ago, right after your appointment was announced." She turned the screen toward him. Jonathan read the messages, his face expressionless. Dawson Rick 47. "New chief is some LA reformer, black guy with a fancy resume, probably going to come in here trying to clean house." Briggs TPD. "Let him try. We've outlasted reformers before." Kowalski Surge. "Maybe he needs a welcome that shows him how things really work here." Jameson Patrol. "You volunteering to give him that welcome, Dawson Rick 47. Somebody needs to show these outsiders they can't just walk into our house and start changing shit." The timestamps showed the last message was sent at 8:30 that morning, 15 minutes before Dawson had confronted Jonathan on the street. "This wasn't random," Jonathan said softly. "This was planned." "We think so," Morrison agreed. "We don't know if Dawson specifically intended to assault you, but he definitely went looking for a confrontation. He just didn't know it was you he was confronting." "Poetic justice," Jonathan muttered. Then louder. "All right, here's what we're going to do. I want you to identify the 20 worst offenders in this group, the ones with the most egregious messages, the clearest evidence of criminal activity. We arrest them tomorrow, simultaneously, 6 a.m., full perp walk in front of the media." "Sir," Chen protested, "that's less than 6 hours from now. We haven't finished building the cases. Defense attorneys will tear us apart if—" "Then we better spend the next 6 hours building airtight cases," Jonathan said. "Call in your entire team. Wake up the prosecutors. I don't care if people are tired. This is happening." Morrison stared at him for a long moment. "You're serious. Deadly serious. This is going to start a war, Chief. The Union will go nuclear. Officers will call in sick. We might face a blue flu situation where half the department refuses to work. Then we'll find out who the real cops are," Jonathan said. "The ones who actually care about serving the community versus the ones who just want to protect their corrupt buddies. Sounds like a useful sorting mechanism to me." Chen shook her head, but she was already pulling up files, already making calls. Morrison grabbed his phone and started texting his team, and Jonathan sat there, his broken nose throbbing his ribs, aching his head pounding, and felt something close to satisfaction. This morning he'd been beaten in the street. Tonight he was burning down the system that made that beating possible. His phone rang. The mayor. "This better be important, Mr. Mayor. It's almost midnight." "Jonathan, what the hell are you doing?" Harding's voice was tight with panic. "I just got a call from the police union's attorney. He's threatening lawsuits, injunctions. He's talking about officers walking off the job. What did you say to Tom Sullivan?" "I told him the truth," Jonathan said, "that reforms are happening whether he likes it or not. You can't just bulldoze your way through this. You need to build consensus work with the union, make them feel like partners in the process." "Mr. Mayor, in approximately 6 hours, I'm arresting 20 police officers for conspiracy, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. I thought you'd want to know so you can prepare your own statement." Silence on the other end. Then, "You're what?" "We've uncovered a conspiracy involving over 200 officers. They've been coordinating misconduct sharing techniques for avoiding accountability stalking activists. It's all documented in a private messaging group. We have screenshots, metadata, everything we need." 200 officers. Harding repeated, his voice hollow. "Jonathan, you can't arrest 200 officers. The city will burn." "I'm arresting 20 tomorrow. The rest will face administrative review and potential criminal charges pending further investigation. But the 20 worst offenders are going down at 6 a.m., and I'm inviting every news camera in Chicago to watch it happen. This is insane. This is political suicide, mine and yours. Mr. Mayor, this morning, I was assaulted by one of my own officers because he thought he could get away with it. Tonight, I discovered that assault wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systemic culture of violence and corruption that has infected this department like cancer. So you can either support me in cutting out that cancer, or you can start looking for a new police chief. Your choice." Another long silence. Jonathan could hear the mayor breathing, could practically hear the political calculations happening in real time. "If I support this," Harding said finally, "the union will try to destroy me. They'll fund my opponent in the next election. They'll run attack ads. They'll paint me as anti-police." "And if you don't support this," Jonathan countered, You'll be the mayor who protected corrupt cops after they beat up his own police chief on camera. Which attack ad sounds worse to you?" Harding laughed bitterly. "When you put it that way. So are you with me or not?" "God help me," Harding said. "I'm with you. But Jonathan, you better be right about this. You better have the evidence to back up what you're claiming. Because if this falls apart, we both go down." "I'm right," Jonathan said. "Trust me." He hung up and looked at Morrison and Chen, who'd been listening to his side of the conversation. "Well," Morrison said, "you just committed us to arresting 20 officers in less than 6 hours. We better get to work." They worked through the night. Jonathan called in favors from federal prosecutors he'd worked with in L.A., got them on conference calls to review the evidence. Morrison's team pulled records, built timelines, established probable cause for each arrest. Chen coordinated with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, who were very interested in what was shaping up to be one of the largest police corruption cases in recent history. At 3 a.m, Jonathan's phone rang again. Unknown number. He answered it anyway. "Chief Price, this is Officer Rivera, Melissa Rivera. You gave me your card earlier." Jonathan sat up straighter, ignoring the protest from his ribs. "Officer Rivera, what can I do for you?" "I'm calling because—" Her voice broke. "I'm in the Street Justice group chat. I've been in it for 6 months. They added me right after I graduated from the academy. I never posted anything, I just lurked, but I saw everything. And I should have reported it. I should have said something, but I was scared and stupid and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jonathan closed his eyes. "Officer Rivera, are you willing to cooperate with our investigation?" "Yes, sir. I'll tell you everything I know. I'll testify. I'll wear a wire if you need me to. I just can't be part of this anymore. I can't be the kind of cop that my training officer wants me to be." "Who's your training officer, Rivera?" "Sergeant Kowalski, sir." The same Kowalski who'd challenged Jonathan in the briefing room. The same Kowalski who'd sent messages about giving the new chief a welcome. "Rivera, I need you to listen carefully. Don't tell anyone you called me. Don't change your behavior around Kowalski or anyone else in that group. Act normal. Can you do that?" "I think so, yes, sir." "Good. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., there are going to be arrests. A lot of arrests. Officers you know, officers you've worked with. It's going to be chaos. But you need to stay calm, stay quiet, and when it's over, you come to my office. We'll talk about everything then. Understood?" "Understood, sir. And Chief?" "Yes. Thank you for giving me a way out." After she hung up, Jonathan sat there for a moment thinking about how many other young officers like Rivera were trapped in that culture, wanting to do the right thing, but terrified of the consequences. Well, tomorrow, the consequences would flow in a different direction. At 5 a.m., they had their warrants. 20 arrest warrants signed by a federal judge who'd been none too happy about being woken up at 4:30, but who'd agreed the evidence was more than sufficient. Morrison had assembled a task force of 30 officers from outside the 9th Precinct officers whose backgrounds had been vetted, who weren't in the Street Justice group, who could be trusted to make these arrests without warning their fellow cops. At 5:30, Jonathan stood in the parking lot of police headquarters, watching the arrest teams gear up. News vans were already arriving, tipped off by an anonymous call from Chen's office. The sun was just starting to lighten the eastern sky, and Chicago was waking up to a day that would change everything. Castellano stood beside him, her face grim. "Sir, I have to tell you, morale is going to be in the toilet after this. The rank-and-file officers are going to see this as a betrayal." "Good," Jonathan said. "Let them feel betrayed. Let them understand that the old rules no longer apply, that covering for bad cops isn't loyalty, it's complicity. Some of the officers we're arresting have families, Chief, kids, mortgages. They're going to lose everything." "They should have thought about that before they decided to use their badges as weapons," Jonathan said. Then more gently, "Deputy Chief, I understand this is hard. I know some of these officers probably seemed like good people to you, but good people don't participate in conspiracy. Good people don't coordinate false testimony. Good people don't stalk civilians who dare to hold them accountable." Castellanos nodded slowly. "You're right. I've worked with some of these people for years. I thought I knew them." "The thing about corruption," Jonathan said, "is that it rarely looks like corruption from the inside. It looks like loyalty. It looks like brotherhood. It looks like protecting your own. That's what makes it so insidious. At 5:55, the arrest teams moved out. 10 teams, 2 officers per target, moving simultaneously across the city to catch their subjects before shift change, before they could be warned, before they could coordinate a response. Jonathan and Castellanos went with the team targeting Sergeant Kowalski. They found him at a diner near the 9th Precinct, eating breakfast with 2 other officers who were also on the arrest list. All 3 looked up when Jonathan walked in, followed by the arrest team in full tactical gear. Kowalski's face went from confusion to recognition to fury in the space of 3 seconds. "You've got to be kidding me." "Sergeant David Kowalski," Morrison said, stepping forward with handcuffs. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent." "This is bullshit," Kowalski exploded, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. "You can't do this. We have rights. You have the right to shut your mouth and comply," Jonathan said coldly. "Or you can add resisting arrest to your charges. Your choice, Sergeant." The other 2 officers, Jameson, the cocky one from the briefing, and another man Jonathan didn't recognize, were cuffed without incident, looking shell-shocked. But Kowalski kept arguing, kept protesting, even as Morrison forced his hands behind his back and secured the cuffs. "This is because of what I said yesterday, isn't it?" Kowalski spat. "I challenged you in that briefing room, and now you're coming after me. This is retaliation, pure and simple." "This is justice," Jonathan said. "We have 4 years of messages from you in the Street Justice Group chat. We have videos you shared of illegal searches. We have screenshots of you coordinating false testimony with other officers. We have you discussing how to intimidate witnesses and destroy evidence. This has nothing to do with yesterday's briefing and everything to do with you being a criminal who happens to wear a badge." Kowalski's face went pale. "You hacked our phones. That's illegal. Anything you found is inadmissible." "We didn't hack anything," Morrison said. "We executed lawful warrants based on probable cause developed during our investigation into Officer Dawson's assault on Chief Price. Everything we found is perfectly admissible. You're going to prison, Kowalski. The only question is for how long." As they perp-walked, Kowalski out of the diner cameras flashed from every direction. News crews had set up outside, and they captured everything. The handcuffs, Kowalski's furious protests, Jonathan's impassive face as he watched another corrupt officer get exactly what he deserved. By 7 a.m., all 20 arrests had been completed. By 7:30, they were being processed at the federal courthouse downtown, and by 8 a.m., the story was everywhere. Jonathan stood at another podium, this time at the federal building, flanked by U.S. Attorney Margaret Chen, no relation to Sergeant Chen, and FBI Special Agent David Marks. "This morning," Jonathan began, "we arrested 20 Chicago police officers on federal charges related to a widespread conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruct justice, and intimidate witnesses. These arrests are the result of an investigation that began yesterday following the assault on myself by Officer Rick Dawson, but which quickly revealed a much larger pattern of corruption." He paused, letting the cameras capture his still bruised face, the visible evidence of the violence that had started all of this. The officers arrested today were members of a private messaging group called Street Justice, which included over 200 members of the Chicago Police Department. In this group, officers shared techniques for avoiding accountability, coordinated false testimony, stalked civilians who dared to film police encounters, and celebrated acts of brutality against the communities they were sworn to protect. The reporters were already shouting questions, but Jonathan continued over them. "I want to be clear about something. These arrests do not represent the entire Chicago Police Department. They represent the worst elements of a toxic culture that has been allowed to fester. But that culture ends today. Every member of the Street Justice Group is now under investigation. Those who cooperated with criminal activity will face criminal charges. Those who witnessed wrongdoing and failed to report it will face administrative discipline, and those who actively participated in violence and corruption will go to prison." U.S. Attorney Chen stepped to the microphone. The charges filed today include conspiracy to violate civil rights under 18 U.S.C. 241, deprivation of rights under color of law, under 18 U.S.C. 242, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and stalking. If convicted, these officers face sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years in federal prison. The press erupted with questions. Chief Price, how many more arrests are you planning? What about the other 180 officers in the group? Is the entire 9th Precinct corrupt? What do you say to critics who claim this is an overreaction? Jonathan held up his hand. The investigation is ongoing. Additional arrests are likely. As for the claim that this is an overreaction, I would ask those critics how they would react if they discovered that 200 lawyers were in a secret group coordinating perjury, or 200 doctors were sharing techniques for insurance fraud, or 200 teachers were discussing how to abuse students without getting caught. Would that be an overreaction to prosecute, or would it be the bare minimum of justice? A reporter in the front row stood up. Chief Price, the police union is calling for your resignation. They're organizing a vote of no confidence. How do you respond? I respond by doing my job, Jonathan said. The union doesn't hire or fire the police chief. The mayor does. And as long as Mayor Harding supports these reforms, I'll continue to implement them. What if he stops supporting you? Then I'll find another city that needs cleaning up, Jonathan said. There's no shortage of them. Another reporter. Chief, are you concerned about officer safety? If you're arresting dozens of cops, who's going to patrol the streets? The officers who actually want to serve the community, Jonathan said. The ones who became cops to help people, not to brutalize them. Those officers are the majority. They've been silenced and intimidated by the corrupt minority for too long. Now they have permission to be the cops they wanted to be. The press conference lasted another 30 minutes, and with each answer, Jonathan felt the weight of the city's attention pressing down on him. This was no longer just about reforming one department. It had become a national referendum on policing itself, a test case that every other city would watch to see if real change was possible. When it finally ended, Jonathan walked back inside the federal building, his legs shaking from exhaustion. He hadn't slept in 32 hours. His broken nose was a constant throb of pain. His ribs felt like someone was stabbing him with every breath. Sarah met him in the hallway, having watched the press conference from inside. She took one look at him and said, "You need a hospital bed and about 12 hours of sleep." "I need to get back to the precinct," Jonathan said. "The day shift is starting. I need to be there, need to show them that—" "Jonathan," Sarah's voice was sharp, "you are going to pass out if you don't rest. You're running on adrenaline and stubbornness, and that tank is empty. Please." He wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he couldn't show weakness, couldn't take a break when there was so much to do. But his body made the decision for him. His vision blurred, his knees buckled, and suddenly he was falling. Sarah caught him barely, and Morrison appeared from somewhere to help hold him up. "Get him to a hospital," Sarah commanded. "Now." "No," Jonathan managed. Just let me sit down for a minute." They guided him to a chair, and he collapsed into it, his head in his hands. The adrenaline was gone, burned through completely, and all that was left was pain and exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning. "Chief," Morrison said gently, "you've been awake for 33 hours. You've conducted a press conference, overseen 20 arrests, and rebuilt an entire department's investigative framework. You're allowed to rest." "Can't," Jonathan muttered. "Too much to do. Rivera is coming to my office at noon. Need to debrief her. Need to review the other officers in the group. I'll handle Rivera," Morrison said. "I'll handle everything until you wake up. But right now, you're going to close your eyes for 4 hours, or I'm having you admitted to the hospital involuntarily. Chief's orders." Jonathan almost laughed at that. "You can't give me orders. I'm your boss." "Then I'm giving you medical advice as someone who cares whether you live or die," Morrison said. "Please, Chief, rest." Sarah knelt beside him. "Baby, you can't save the world if you kill yourself trying. 4 hours. That's all we're asking. 4 hours of sleep, then you can go back to being Superman." Jonathan looked at his wife, at Morrison at Castellanos, who'd joined them, and was looking at him with genuine concern. He thought about arguing, thought about pushing through, proving he was strong enough to handle anything. But the truth was he wasn't. He was human, he was injured, he was exhausted, and if he kept pushing, he was going to make mistakes that would cost people more than his pride was worth. 4 hours, he said finally. But someone stays with me. I don't want to be vulnerable if— I'll stay, Sarah said. And Morrison will post guards outside. You'll be safe. They found an empty office with a couch, and Jonathan lay down, not even bothering to remove his shoes. Sarah draped a jacket over him like a blanket, and the last thing he heard before sleep claimed him was her voice, soft and fierce. I'm so proud of you, and so scared for you, but mostly proud. He wanted to respond, wanted to tell her he loved her, wanted to promise he'd be careful. But sleep was already pulling him under, and he surrendered to it gratefully. He dreamed of Dawson's fist, of blood on white silk, of 200 officers standing in a circle, watching him bleed, doing nothing. Of Dorothy Washington crying over her grandson's grave, of young Officer Rivera trapped and terrified and alone, and he dreamed of fire, cleansing fire that burned away the rot and left only truth behind. When he woke 4 hours and 17 minutes later, his phone had 300 new messages. The police union had officially called for his resignation. 17 officers had called in sick in an apparent coordinated action. The mayor had given another press conference supporting the arrests, and the hashtag #FireThemAll was trending #1 worldwide. The war had begun in earnest, and Jonathan Price, broken nose and all, was ready to fight it. Jonathan woke to Sarah shaking his shoulder gently, her face tight with worry. His mouth tasted like copper and old coffee, and for a moment he didn't remember where he was or why his entire body felt like it had been run over by a truck. Then it all came rushing back. The assault, the arrests, the war he'd declared on his own department. "What time is it?" he asked, his voice rough. 1:15, Sarah said. "You slept for 4 hours. Morrison tried to let you sleep longer, but there's a situation." Jonathan sat up, ignoring the screaming protest from his ribs. "What kind of situation? The kind where half your police force just walked off the job?" He was on his feet immediately, pain be damned. Sarah handed him a bottle of water and 2 more ibuprofen, which he swallowed without question. Then she passed him his phone, and he saw the cascade of messages, the emergency alerts, the news notifications, all saying the same thing in different words. Blue flu, mass walkout, police strike. "How many?" Jonathan asked, already heading for the door. "Last count was 347 officers called in sick," Sarah said, following him. "That's almost a third of the patrol division. The union is calling it a spontaneous reaction to your persecution of fellow officers, but the timing is obviously coordinated." "Of course it is," Jonathan muttered. He was moving fast now, ignoring the elevator and taking the stairs 2 at a time despite his injuries. Sarah struggled to keep up. "Jonathan, slow down. You're going to hurt yourself worse." "I'm already hurt," he said. "Now I need to fix this before the city realizes it has no police protection and everything goes to hell." They burst out of the federal building into chaos. News vans everywhere, reporters shouting questions, protesters on both sides of the street. One group held signs supporting Jonathan, praising the arrests, demanding more accountability. The other group waved thin blue line flags, chanted about backing the blue, called Jonathan a traitor, and worse. A reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "Chief Price, how do you respond to accusations that you've created a crisis by alienating your own officers?" "No comment," Jonathan said, pushing past. Another reporter, more aggressive. "Chief, the union president just called you the most dangerous man in Chicago. He said you've declared war on law enforcement itself. Is he right?" Jonathan stopped, turned, looked directly at the camera. "The union president is wrong," he said. "I haven't declared war on law enforcement. I've declared war on corruption. If he can't tell the difference, that tells you everything you need to know about the union's priorities." He kept walking, leaving the reporters speechless behind him. The drive to the 9th Precinct took 20 minutes through midday traffic. When they arrived, Jonathan saw immediately that the situation was worse than he'd thought. The parking lot was half empty. Through the windows, he could see officers standing in clusters, arguing, some in uniform and some in street clothes, like they were in the middle of deciding whether to stay or go. "This is bad," Castellano said. She'd met them at the entrance, her face gray with stress. "We're down to skeleton crew. Dispatch is getting overwhelmed with calls, and we don't have enough units to respond. I've already had to call in off-duty officers and request mutual aid from neighboring districts." "How many officers are still working?" Jonathan asked. "Here at the 9th, maybe 40, out of a normal shift of 120. Citywide, we're at about 60% capacity. And Chief, it's not just patrol. We're losing detectives, supervisors, even some civilians in support roles." Jonathan walked into the precinct, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees when he appeared. Officers who'd been talking stopped mid-sentence. Others turned their backs deliberately. One older officer, a veteran with 3 decades on the force, actually spat on the floor as Jonathan passed. "Traitor," the man muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Jonathan stopped. "Officer, what's your name?" "Martinez," the man said, meeting Jonathan's eyes with open hostility. "And I ain't calling you chief. You don't deserve that title." "Officer Martinez, are you on duty right now?" "I'm on my way out. Calling in sick. Got a case of the blue flu, if you know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," Jonathan said. "You're participating in an illegal work stoppage. You're abandoning your post during a crisis. You're violating your oath to serve and protect. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn in your badge and your weapon right now, and you're going to leave this building as a civilian. You're fired." The room went dead silent. Martinez's face turned purple. "You can't fire me. I've got union protection. I've got 30 years. "You've got 30 years of pension that you just forfeited," Jonathan interrupted, "because the one thing your union contract doesn't protect is job abandonment during a declared emergency. And as of 1 hour ago, Mayor Harding declared a state of emergency for the city of Chicago specifically because of this walkout. So your union protection is void. Your job is over. Badge and weapon. Now." Martinez looked around the room, clearly expecting support, expecting someone to defend him. But the other officers just stared, realizing that Jonathan wasn't bluffing, that the rules had actually changed. Slowly, reluctantly, Martinez unclipped his badge and placed it on the nearest desk. Then his service weapon, his backup piece, his cuffs. He stripped himself of every symbol of authority he'd carried for 3 decades, and with each item he set down, his shoulders sagged a little more. "You're making a mistake," Martinez said, his voice shaking now. "The union is going to destroy you for this." "The union is welcome to try," Jonathan said. "Anyone else want to call in sick? Anyone else suffering from blue flu? Step forward now, because this is your one chance. You walk out that door right now, you're not coming back." Nobody moved. The officers who'd been in street clothes, clearly planning to leave, suddenly found reasons to stay. Some went to change back into uniform. Others pulled out their phones, presumably calling colleagues to warn them that Jonathan wasn't playing games. "That's what I thought," Jonathan said. "Deputy Chief Castellanos, I want a roll call. Every officer currently on duty, I want them in the briefing room in 5 minutes." "Yes, sir," Castellano said, relief evident in her voice. As the officers filed into the briefing room, Jonathan pulled out his phone and made a call he'd been dreading. His contact at the Illinois National Guard, a colonel he'd worked with on a joint task force years ago. "David, it's Jonathan Price. I need to ask you a favor, and you're going to want to say no, but I need you to hear me out." 20 minutes later, Jonathan stood in front of 60 officers, the only ones from the 9th Precinct who'd chosen to stay. They looked exhausted, scared and angry in roughly equal measure. "I know what you're thinking," Jonathan began. "You're thinking that I've made your jobs impossible, that I've turned the public against you, demoralized, the force created a crisis that's going to get someone killed. And you're partly right. I have created a crisis. But I didn't create the underlying problem. That's been festering for years." He paused, looking at each face. "The officers who walked out today, who abandoned their duty because they're more loyal to corrupt colleagues than to the communities they serve, they made a choice. And that choice revealed who they really are. You, the ones who stayed, you also made a choice. You chose to serve even when it's hard, even when it's complicated, even when your union is telling you to walk away. That tells me who you are, and I will never forget it." A young officer in the front row raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, with all respect, we're down to 1/3 of our normal strength. How are we supposed to patrol the entire district? How are we supposed to respond to calls? People are going to die because we don't have enough officers." "You're absolutely right," Jonathan said, "which is why I've requested assistance from the National Guard. As of 4 p.m. today, 200 Guard members will be deployed to assist with traffic control, securing government buildings, and providing visible presence in high-crime areas. This will free you up to focus on actual police work." The room erupted in protest. "The National Guard, sir, that's going to look like martial law. The optics are terrible. The community is going to think we've lost control." Jonathan held up his hand. "The community is right. We have lost control. We lost it the moment 200 officers decided that protecting their corrupt colleagues was more important than protecting civilians. We lost it when a third of this department walked off the job because they didn't like being held accountable. So yes, I'm calling in the Guard. And yes, it's going to look bad. But you know what looks worse? A city with no police protection because the officers who are supposed to protect it are throwing a tantrum." Castellano stepped forward. "Sir, if I may. The officers who stayed, they're worried about being labeled as traitors by their colleagues. They're worried about retaliation, about being frozen out, about working with people who hate them for not joining the walkout." "Then those people won't be working here anymore," Jonathan said flatly. "Any officer who retaliates against someone for doing their job will be fired immediately. Any officer who creates a hostile work environment will be fired. Any officer who prioritizes the blue wall of silence over the actual work of policing will be fired. I'm done with half measures. I'm done with trying to make everyone comfortable. This department is going to serve the community, or it's going to be dismantled and rebuilt from scratch." An older officer in the back stood up. Jonathan recognized him from the morning briefing, one of the quiet ones who hadn't challenged him but hadn't seemed particularly supportive either. "Chief, I'm Officer Frank Wade. I've been on this job 22 years. I've seen reform chiefs come and go. I've seen grand plans and bold promises, and I've seen every single one of them fail because at the end of the day, the culture always wins. The blue wall always stands. So why should we believe you're any different?" It was a fair question asked without hostility, and Jonathan respected that. "Officer Wade, you're right that previous reform efforts have failed. You want to know why? Because they tried to change the culture while keeping the same people in power. They tried to modify behavior through training and policy while protecting the officers who refused to change. They tried to have it both ways to reform the department without actually removing the people who made it toxic in the first place. I'm not making that mistake." He pulled out his phone and held it up so everyone could see the screen. "As of this morning, I have authorization from Mayor Harding to terminate any officer for cause without the standard appeal process during this declared state of emergency. That authorization lasts for 90 days. In those 90 days, every officer in this department is going to prove they deserve to wear this badge. And the ones who can't, who won't, they're gone. No union protection, no endless appeals, no second chances for people who've already had a dozen chances." The room was silent, the weight of what he was saying settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. "This is your department now," Jonathan continued. "The officers who stayed, who chose service over solidarity with corruption, you get to define what the Chicago Police Department becomes. You can make it something the community trusts, something you're proud to be part of. Or you can keep protecting the bad apples and wondering why civilians hate you. Your choice." Officer Rivera stood up from where she'd been sitting quietly in the back. Her face was pale but determined. "Sir, I want to help. I was in the street justice chat. I saw things. I can identify officers who need to be investigated." The other officers turned to stare at her, and Jonathan saw the fear in her eyes, the knowledge that she'd just painted a target on her back. "Officer Rivera, thank you. Report to Lieutenant Morrison's office after this briefing. He'll take your statement." Then addressing the room, "And let me be clear, Officer Rivera is a hero for coming forward. Anyone who retaliates against her in any way will answer to me personally. She's showing more courage than every officer who walked out today combined." Another hand went up, Officer Chen, the young man who'd been driving Jonathan yesterday. "Sir, what about the officers who were arrested? Some of them have families, kids. I know what they did was wrong, but are we just supposed to forget about their families?" No, Jonathan said. We're not. Which is why I've already set up a victims fund for the families of officers who are convicted. It won't replace their income, but it will provide temporary support while they figure out their next steps. Because here's the thing, Officer Chen. Those officers made choices that hurt their families. Not me. They chose to be corrupt. They chose to participate in a criminal conspiracy. They chose to risk everything for the thrill of abusing their power. I didn't make those choices for them. They made them knowing full well what the consequences would be if they got caught. So yes, I feel bad for their families, but not bad enough to let their crimes go unpunished. The briefing lasted another hour with Jonathan taking questions, addressing concerns, and laying out the immediate operational plan. When it finally ended, the officers filed out looking shell-shocked, but Jonathan hoped maybe a little bit hopeful. Castellanos caught up with him in the hallway. "Sir, that was good. You gave them something to believe in. But you know the union isn't going to take this lying down. They're already filing injunctions calling for investigations into your conduct, demanding the mayor fire you." "Let them try," Jonathan said. "I've got the law on my side, the evidence to back it up, and most importantly, I've got the moral high ground. They're fighting to protect criminals. I'm fighting to protect the community. That's a battle I'll win every time." His phone rang. Morrison. "Chief, you need to get down to the federal courthouse. The arraignments for the 20 officers are starting, and there's something you need to see." "On my way," Jonathan said. The federal courthouse was surrounded by protesters when Jonathan arrived 30 minutes later. Hundreds of people on both sides of the issue, the crowd so thick that riot police had to form a corridor for people to enter the building. Jonathan pushed through, ignoring the chants of "traitor" from one side and "thank you" from the other. Inside, Morrison met him with a grave expression. "Chief, we have a problem. The union hired David Brennan to represent all 20 officers." Jonathan felt his stomach drop. David Brennan was one of the most famous defense attorneys in the country, known for getting cops acquitted in seemingly impossible cases. He was expensive, connected, and absolutely ruthless. "How can the union afford Brennan?" Jonathan asked. "His retainer alone must be in the millions." "It is," Morrison said. "Word is they got outside funding. There's a national police union coalition that's decided to make this their line in the sand. They're pouring resources into defending these officers, because if they lose here, it sets a precedent that could affect departments across the country." "Good," Jonathan said. "Let them waste their money. We've got the evidence. We've got the screenshots, the videos, the witness statements. Brennan can't charm his way out of that." They entered the courtroom, and Jonathan immediately saw Brennan holding court with a group of reporters, his silver hair perfectly styled, his $1,000 suit impeccable. "This prosecution is a witch hunt," Brennan was saying, his voice carrying across the room. "My clients are dedicated public servants who have spent years protecting the city of Chicago. And now, because of one incident involving an overzealous reformer who provoked a confrontation to create a pretext for persecution, these men are facing decades in prison. It's unconscionable." Jonathan walked right up to him. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Chief Price, the overzealous reformer you just mentioned." Brennan turned his smile, not faltering for a second. "Chief Price, I was hoping to meet you. I wanted to thank you personally for making my job so easy. How's that? You've conducted this investigation with such obvious bias, such transparent vindictiveness, that any reasonable jury will see it for what it is, a vendetta. You were assaulted by one officer, and in response you've launched a crusade against dozens of others. The facts don't matter. The evidence doesn't matter. You've already decided they're guilty." "The evidence decided they're guilty," Jonathan said. "I just documented it." "We'll see what a jury thinks," Brennan said. "And Chief, a word of advice. In my experience, prosecutors who make cases personal, who turn investigations into moral crusades, they almost always lose. Because juries don't like zealots. They like facts. And the facts are going to show that my clients are the victims here, not the perpetrators." Before Jonathan could respond, the bailiff called for everyone to rise. Judge Helena Martinez entered a no-nonsense federal judge with a reputation for being tough but fair. The arraignment process was routine. Each officer was brought out in handcuffs, read the charges against them, entered a plea of not guilty, and was given a bail hearing. Brennan argued passionately for low bail or release on recognizance, citing each officer's years of service, family ties to the community, and lack of flight risk. But U.S. Attorney Margaret Chen argued just as passionately that these officers had shown a willingness to abuse their power, intimidate witnesses, and coordinate criminal activity. They were, she argued, a danger to the community if released. Judge Martinez listened to both sides and then made her ruling. Given the serious nature of the charges, the evidence of a coordinated conspiracy, and the potential for witness intimidation, I'm setting bail at $500,000 per defendant. They will also be required to surrender their passports and agree to GPS monitoring if bail is posted. Brennan's face tightened, but he said nothing. $500,000 was high enough to be punitive, but low enough that the union could probably scrape it together. As the proceedings continued, Jonathan noticed something. The 20 officers being arraigned were putting on a show. They stood straight, looked respectful, some even had tears in their eyes. This was theater, a performance for the cameras and the jury pool. They were no longer the arrogant cops from the street justice chat. They were victims persecuted for doing their jobs. And it was working. Jonathan could see some reporters in the gallery buying it, could already imagine the think pieces about overzealous reform and the dangers of painting all police with the same brush. When the arraignments finally ended 3 hours later, Jonathan was exhausted and frustrated. He'd expected victory to feel more satisfying. Instead, it felt like the fight was just beginning. Outside the courthouse, Brennan was already giving another press conference. "What we saw today was a travesty of justice," he declared. 20 men and women who have dedicated their lives to public service, treated like common criminals, subjected to excessive bail, paraded in handcuffs before the media, all to satisfy one man's ego and political ambitions. A reporter asked, "Mr. Brennan, what about the evidence of the street justice chat, the screenshots showing coordination of illegal activity?" "Locker room talk," Brennan said dismissively. "Dark humor between officers dealing with the stress of a dangerous job. Are we really going to criminalize jokes now? Are we going to send people to prison for text messages taken out of context?" "They coordinated false testimony," another reporter challenged. "Allegedly," Brennan corrected. "And we will vigorously contest those allegations at trial. But even if some of those messages were inappropriate, that doesn't justify this wholesale persecution of law enforcement. Chief Price has created an atmosphere where good cops are afraid to do their jobs, where split-second decisions are second-guessed by people who've never worn the uniform." Jonathan couldn't listen anymore. He started walking back to his car, but a reporter caught up with him. "Chief Price, how do you respond to Mr. Brennan's accusations?" "I respond by doing my job," Jonathan said. "Mr. Brennan can spin this however he wants. The jury will see the evidence and make their own decision." "But doesn't he have a point? Haven't you made this personal?" Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face the reporter fully. "Yes, I've made it personal, because when officers brutalize people, when they abuse their power, when they treat the communities they serve like enemy territory, that should be personal to everyone. It should matter to all of us. The fact that it took me getting punched in the face for people to pay attention doesn't make the underlying problem any less real." His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Turn on the news. Now." He pulled up a news stream on his phone and his blood went cold. The headline, "Riot Breaks Out in Southside Police Unable to Respond Due to Walkout." The video showed chaos. Stores being looted, fires burning, people running through the streets. And in the background, a reporter was explaining that police response times had tripled due to the walkout, that the remaining officers couldn't cover the entire city, that the situation was spiraling out of control. "This is the result of Chief Price's reckless policies," the reporter was saying. "When you alienate your police force, when you treat them like the enemy, this is what happens. The thin blue line breaks and chaos fills the void." Jonathan's hands were shaking as he watched. This was exactly what he'd feared, what the union had probably been hoping for. They'd abandoned their posts, let the city burn, and now they'd blame it on him. "I need to get to the south side," he said. "Now." "Chief, you can't," Morrison said. He'd appeared at Jonathan's elbow, his face grim. "You're not a patrol officer anymore. You can't just ride into a riot." "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit here while the city tears itself apart?" "You're supposed to lead," Morrison said. "Make the calls, deploy the resources, coordinate the response. That's what the chief does." Jonathan closed his eyes, forcing himself to think clearly. Morrison was right. He wasn't a street cop anymore. He was the chief, and chiefs didn't ride to the rescue. They managed the overall response. But God, it was hard to stand there doing nothing while his city burned. He made the calls, mobilized every available officer, requested additional mutual aid from surrounding suburbs, accelerated the National Guard deployment, and most importantly, he called the community leaders he'd been meeting with all week, asking them to help calm things down, to get people off the streets, to prevent this from becoming worse than it already was. By midnight, the riot had been contained. Dozens of arrests, millions in property damage, but no deaths. It could have been so much worse. But as Jonathan finally collapsed into his hotel room at 2 a.m., he knew the narrative was already set. The news wouldn't talk about the officers who'd abandoned their duty. They'd talk about the chief who'd created the conditions for chaos. They'd talk about reform gone too far, about the dangers of alienating police, about the thin blue line, and what happens when you break it. Sarah was waiting for him, and she held him without saying anything. Just held him while he shook with exhaustion and frustration, and the weight of everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Sarah said firmly. "You absolutely are. And you know how I know how. Because every time someone tells you that you can't, that you shouldn't, that you're going too far, you keep going anyway. That's not stubbornness, baby. That's strength. That's conviction. And the city needs it, even if they don't know it yet." Jonathan closed his eyes and tried to believe her, because tomorrow he'd have to get up and do it all again. Face the cameras, face the criticism, face the union and the protests and the politicians who were already distancing themselves from him. Tomorrow he'd have to prove that reform was possible, that accountability could work, that you could break the blue wall without breaking the city. Tomorrow. But tonight he just needed to rest. 3 weeks after the riot, Jonathan stood in front of a mirror in his office, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His nose had healed mostly straight, though there was a slight crook that would be permanent. The bruises had faded to yellow-green shadows under his eyes. The ribs still ached when he breathed too deep, but he could function without wincing every time he moved. The physical wounds were healing. The other wounds ran deeper. "You ready for this?" Morrison asked from the doorway. He held a thick folder, the culmination of 3 weeks of intensive investigation. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jonathan said. "How many total?" 43 officers were recommending for termination, another 78 facing suspension or demotion, and we've identified 12 cases where criminal charges are warranted beyond the original 20. Jonathan took the folder, flipped through it. Names he recognized. Officers he'd passed in hallways, seen at roll calls. Some had families. Some had been cops longer than Jonathan had been alive. All had made choices that ended here in this folder, their careers reduced to incident reports and witness statements. "The union is going to lose their minds," Jonathan said. "They already have," Morrison replied. "Did you see the latest? They're planning a protest at City Hall. 10,000 officers from across the state, all demanding your resignation." "Let them protest," Jonathan said. "It's their right, but it won't change what's happening here." His phone rang. Mayor Harding. "Chief, we need to talk. My office. Now." The tone told Jonathan everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. When Jonathan arrived at City Hall 20 minutes later, he found not just the mayor, but the entire city council in the conference room. Their faces ranged from hostile to terrified, and Jonathan understood immediately that this was an ambush. "Chief Price," Mayor Harding began, his voice tight. We need to discuss the situation. The economic impact of your reforms has been significant. Businesses in the South Side have lost millions due to the riot. Tourism is down 18%. Convention bookings are being canceled. The city's bond rating is under review. We're looking at a fiscal crisis. And you think that's my fault? Jonathan asked. Councilman Roberts, a heavy-set man with political ambitions, leaned forward. Chief, when you alienate your entire police force, when you create conditions where a third of them walk off the job, yes, we think that's your fault. They chose to walk off, Jonathan said. I didn't make them. They abandoned their duty because they didn't want to be held accountable for corruption. That's on them, not me. The public doesn't see it that way, another councilwoman said. The polls show your approval rating at 32%. The mayor's has dropped 15 points since he backed you. This is becoming politically untenable. Jonathan looked at Mayor Harding. Is that what this is? You're worried about your poll numbers? Harding had the grace to look uncomfortable. Jonathan, I supported you. I gave you the authority you needed, but you have to understand there's only so far I can go. If the city council votes no confidence, if the business community turns against us, if the next election becomes a referendum on police reform, we lose everything. And then what was it all for? It was for justice, Jonathan said quietly. It was for every person who was beaten by cops like Dawson and had no recourse. It was for Marcus Washington, shot 8 times at 17 years old by officers who faced no consequences. It was for every kid in every neighborhood who's learned to fear the people who are supposed to protect them. That's what it was for. That's very noble, Roberts said, his voice dripping sarcasm. But nobility doesn't pay city employees' salaries. Nobility doesn't fix the budget deficit. Nobility doesn't win elections. Then maybe you're in the wrong business, Jonathan shot back. The room erupted. Council members talking over each other, voices raised, accusations flying. Jonathan stood in the center of it, silent, watching the people who were supposed to lead the city reveal exactly who they were when things got difficult. Finally, Mayor Harding held up his hand. Enough. Everyone out. I need to speak with Chief Price alone. The council filed out, some throwing angry glances at Jonathan, others looking almost sympathetic. When the door closed, Harding collapsed into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. I'm not firing you, he said. I want you to know that up front. But Jonathan, I need you to give me something. Some sign of compromise. Some gesture that shows you're willing to work with the union, that you're not just on a scorched earth crusade. Like what? Jonathan asked. You want me to drop charges against officers who committed crimes. You want me to stop investigating corruption. What kind of compromise are you looking for? I want you to slow down, Harding said. You've arrested 20 officers. You're recommending termination for 40 more. You've alienated half the department and scared the other half. What if you just paused, let things settle, let the trials play out, then reassess? And in the meantime, the corrupt officers, who haven't been caught yet, destroy evidence, coordinate their stories, intimidate witnesses. Is that the plan? The plan is survival, Harding said. For both of us. Because if I lose the next election to someone who runs on a platform of firing you and restoring order, everything you've accomplished will be undone in a day. Is that what you want? Jonathan sat down across from the mayor. What I want is irrelevant. This isn't about what I want. It's about what's right. Then we're going to lose, Harding said simply, because right doesn't win elections. Fear does. Security does. The promise of order and stability. And right now, you represent chaos. Before Jonathan could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Chen. Turn on Channel 7, now. Jonathan pulled up the news stream on his phone, and his blood went cold. The headline, Exclusive Officer Reveals Chief Price's Secret Past. On screen, a woman Jonathan didn't recognize was being interviewed. The Chiron identified her as Detective Linda Walsh, 15-year veteran of the Chicago PD. Chief Price came here with a reputation as a reformer, Walsh was saying. But what people don't know is that he left his last department under a cloud. There was an incident in Los Angeles where his tactics led to the death of a suspect. The department covered it up, transferred him rather than fire him. And now he's here judging us, destroying careers, acting like he's some kind of saint. But he's not. He's just as dirty as the rest of us. Jonathan's hands were shaking. That's a lie. That's a complete fabrication. Is it? Harding asked quietly. Yes, I left L.A. because I was offered this position. There was no incident, no cover-up, nothing. This is the union trying to destroy my credibility. Can you prove that I can get my personnel file from L.A., I can provide witness statements, I can... Jonathan stopped seeing the doubt in Harding's eyes. You don't believe me. I want to believe you, Harding said. But Jonathan, in politics, the truth doesn't matter as much as the narrative. And the narrative right now is that you're a hypocrite with a shady past who's on a vendetta. True or not, that's what people are hearing. Jonathan stood up. I'm not slowing down. I'm not compromising with corruption. And if that costs you the election, if that costs me my job, so be it. But I won't betray the people who are counting on me to fix this broken system. He walked out of the mayor's office, his mind racing. The union was playing dirty, spreading lies, trying to undermine everything he'd built. And it was working. He could feel the support slipping away, could feel the political ground shifting beneath his feet. His phone rang again. Sarah. Baby, I just saw the news. That woman is lying, right? Tell me she's lying. She's lying, Jonathan said. There was no incident in L.A. This is a smear campaign. Then we fight it. We get ahead of this. We hold a press conference. We show documentation. Sarah, I'm tired, Jonathan said, and was surprised to hear his voice crack. I'm so tired of fighting. Every time I think we're making progress, something else happens. The riot, the walkout, the lies. I don't know if I have anything left. Jonathan Michael Price, don't you dare give up now. Sarah's voice was fierce. You've come too far. You've sacrificed too much. Those officers who stayed, who chose to be better, they're counting on you. Dorothy Washington and all the families like hers, they're counting on you. You don't get to quit just because it got hard. It's not just hard, Sarah, it's impossible. The mayor wants me to compromise. The council wants me gone. The union is destroying my reputation. And for what? So I can fire a few dozen cops out of thousands, so I can feel like I made a difference while the system stays fundamentally broken. You're not thinking clearly, Sarah said. You're exhausted and hurt and overwhelmed. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to come back to the hotel. You're going to eat something. You're going to sleep. And tomorrow, with a clear head, you're going to decide if you're really done or if you're just having a bad day. Jonathan wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He was running on empty, making decisions from a place of desperation rather than strategy. Okay, he said. I'm coming home. But before he could leave City Hall, Morrison intercepted him in the hallway, his face urgent. Chief, we have a break in the case. A big one. Officer Rivera came through. She's been wearing a wire for the past week, and we just got a recording you need to hear. They went to Morrison's car, where he played the audio through the stereo. Jonathan listened to Officer Kowalski's voice recorded 3 days ago in a bar where Rivera had met him. The chief thinks he's won, but he hasn't. We've got people working on him, digging into his past, finding dirt. And if we can't find dirt, we'll make some up. That Walsh woman. She's being paid $50,000 from the Union Defense Fund to say whatever we tell her to say. By the time we're done, Price will be radioactive. No mayor will be able to keep him. No department will hire him. We'll destroy him the way he's trying to destroy us. Then another voice won. Jonathan recognized Tom Sullivan, the union president. And if that doesn't work, we have other options. The man's wife works at Children's Memorial Hospital, right? Be a shame if something happened to make her job difficult. Or maybe someone files a complaint about Price himself. Sexual harassment, use of force, something that triggers an automatic investigation. Point is, we have options. And we're going to use every single one until that son of a bitch is gone. The recording ended. Jonathan sat in silence, processing what he'd just heard. They're conspiring to destroy me, he said finally. That's witness intimidation, obstruction of justice conspiracy. We can arrest Sullivan, Kowalski, everyone involved. We can, Morrison agreed. And we will. But Chief, there's something else. After Sullivan left, Kowalski stayed and kept drinking. He got sloppy, started bragging, and he said something about the Marcus Washington shooting. Morrison fast-forwarded the recording. Kowalski's voice slurred. "You know the worst part? That Washington kid, the one everyone's crying about, he didn't have a gun. We planted it. Me and Rodriguez and Thompson. Kid was running away and Rodriguez panicked and shot him 8 times, and then we planted a throwaway piece and wrote it up as a good shoot. The grandmother can cry all she wants, but there's no evidence because we made sure of that." Jonathan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach all over again. He just confessed to murder and a cover-up on tape. "Not just him," Morrison said. He named 2 other officers, Rodriguez and Thompson. They're both still on the force, both in the Street Justice Group. And Chief, if Kowalski's willing to talk about that while drunk, how many other murders have been covered up? How many other planted guns? Jonathan's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a cold fury so intense it was almost cleansing. Where's Kowalski now? County lockup, still waiting for his trial on the original charges. Bring him in, offer him a deal, full immunity for his testimony against Rodriguez and Thompson and anyone else involved in the Washington shooting. And get me Dorothy Washington's number. She deserves to know the truth. An hour later, Jonathan sat across from Dorothy Washington in his office, Morrison beside him as a witness. The elderly woman looked frail, like the past 3 years had aged her a decade. "Mrs. Washington." Jonathan began, his voice gentle. "I have information about Marcus's death. Information that's going to be difficult to hear." "Tell me," she said. "I've been living with not knowing for 3 years. Whatever you found can't be worse than that." Jonathan told her everything. The recording, Kowalski's confession, the planted gun, the cover-up. With each revelation, Dorothy's face crumpled, a little more tears streaming silently down her cheeks. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then, "You're going to arrest them, the officers who killed my baby." "Yes, ma'am, within the hour. Murder charges, conspiracy, evidence tampering, everything we can make stick. And Mrs. Washington, I promise you, they will face justice. Real justice. Not the kind where they get suspended for a week. The kind where they spend the rest of their lives in prison." Dorothy reached across the desk and took Jonathan's hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for caring. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for seeing my Marcus as a person, not just another case file." "I'm sorry it took so long," Jonathan said, his own voice thick. "I'm sorry it took me getting beaten up for anyone to pay attention. That's not right. That's not justice." "But it's happening now," Dorothy said. "That's what matters. It's happening now." The arrests of Rodriguez and Thompson made national news. 2 officers charged with first-degree murder in the shooting of an unarmed teenager 3 years ago. The story dominated every news cycle, and suddenly the narrative shifted. This wasn't about an overzealous reformer anymore. This was about justice delayed, but finally delivered. This was about a system that had protected murderers being torn down by someone brave enough to do what needed to be done. Jonathan's approval rating jumped 20 points overnight. The mayor's office stopped calling with concerns. The city council went quiet. And the union, suddenly finding itself defending officers who'd murdered a teenager and planted evidence, lost the public relations war spectacularly. But Jonathan knew the fight wasn't over, not even close. 2 months later, the trials began. Jonathan testified in every single one. The jury listened as he recounted what Dawson had done, heard the recordings from the Street Justice Group, saw the evidence of systematic corruption. David Brennan fought hard, cross-examining Jonathan for 6 hours straight, trying to catch him in inconsistencies, trying to paint him as biased and vindictive. But Jonathan had the truth on his side, and the truth was backed by mountains of evidence. The first conviction came on a Tuesday afternoon. Officer Rick Dawson guilty on all counts. 12 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. Dawson's face when the verdict was read was something Jonathan would never forget. The shock, the disbelief, the sudden realization that the world he'd known where cops could do whatever they wanted without consequence was gone forever. The other convictions followed like dominoes. Briggs got 8 years. Kowalski turned state's evidence and got 5. Rodriguez and Thompson were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. And Walsh, the officer who'd lied about Jonathan's past, was charged with perjury and conspiracy. She pled guilty and received 3 years probation in exchange for revealing who'd paid her to lie. It was Tom Sullivan, the union president. He was arrested on a Wednesday morning, the same day the Department of Justice announced a federal investigation into the entire Chicago Police Department. The reforms Jonathan had fought for became mandatory: federal oversight, civilian review boards with real power, body cameras that couldn't be turned off, de-escalation training that wasn't optional, and most importantly, a complete cultural overhaul from the top down. 6 months after that first morning, Jonathan stood in the same spot where Dawson had hit him. Someone had put up a small memorial there, flowers and notes from community members thanking him for his sacrifice. Officer Rivera was with him now, promoted to detective and leading the reformed Internal Affairs Division. She'd testified in 7 trials, faced death threats and harassment, but never wavered. "You know what's crazy?" Rivera said. "A year ago, I thought the blue wall was permanent. I thought trying to fight it was suicide. And now look at us. The wall fell. It actually fell." "It fell because people like you were brave enough to chip away at it," Jonathan said. "I just provided the spotlight. You did the actual work." "We both did," Rivera said. "And we're not done. There are still officers out there who need to be held accountable. Still cases that need to be reopened. Still families waiting for justice." "Then we keep working," Jonathan said. That evening, Jonathan returned to the hotel where he and Sarah had been living for 6 months. She met him at the door with a smile and an envelope. "This came today," she said, "from the mayor." Jonathan opened it, expecting another political headache. Instead, he found a handwritten note. "Chief Price, I was wrong to ask you to compromise. I was wrong to doubt you. History will remember you as the man who saved this city's soul. I'm grateful I got to be part of it, even if I didn't always have your courage. Thank you, Mayor Richard Harding." Jonathan handed the note to Sarah, who read it and smiled. "See," she said, "you changed his mind. You changed a lot of minds." "At what cost?" Jonathan asked. "My body is wrecked. My marriage has been tested. I've made enemies who will hate me for the rest of my life. Was it worth it?" Sarah took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Ask Dorothy Washington if it was worth it. Ask the families of all those other victims who finally got justice. Ask Officer Rivera who gets to be the kind of cop she always wanted to be. Ask yourself in 10 years, when this department is actually serving its community instead of terrorizing it, then tell me if it was worth it." Jonathan kissed her tasting salt from tears he hadn't realized he was crying. "You're right. You're always right." "I know," she said. "Now come to bed. Tomorrow you have that ceremony at the police academy, and you need to look presentable." The next morning, Jonathan stood before 200 new police recruits at their graduation ceremony. These weren't the old guard. These were the future young men and women who'd applied after seeing what had happened, who wanted to be part of the solution. "When you put on this uniform," Jonathan told them, "you're making a promise, not to your fellow officers, not to the union, not to me, to the community. You're promising to protect people who can't protect themselves, to serve without prejudice, to act with integrity even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching." He paused, looking at their faces, seeing hope and determination and the kind of idealism that the old culture would have crushed. "Some of you know my story. You know what happened to me on my first day. You know about the arrests, the trials, the fight to reform this department. And you might be wondering if it's worth it. If putting on this badge means stepping into a war zone where you'll be hated by some, questioned by others, and expected to be perfect every single day." The room was silent, hanging on his words. "It is worth it," Jonathan said. "Because every time you choose to de-escalate instead of escalate, every time you treat someone with dignity, even when they're not treating you well, every time you stand up to a colleague who's crossing the line, you're building the kind of department this city deserves. You're proving that the badge means something, that it stands for justice, not impunity." He touched his nose, the slight crook still visible. "This scar reminds me every day why we needed to change, but it also reminds me that change is possible. That standing up for what's right, even when it costs you, is never a waste. So wear your uniform with pride, serve with honor, And never forget that you're not above the law. You're the guardian of it." The applause was thunderous, and Jonathan saw tears on some faces, determination on others, and hope on all of them. After the ceremony, an older officer approached him. Jonathan recognized him as Frank Wade, the one who'd questioned him in that first briefing. Chief Wade said, "I owe you an apology. I didn't think you could change things. I thought the culture was too strong, too entrenched. But you did it. You actually did it. And I'm sorry I doubted you." "You don't owe me an apology," Jonathan said. "You were right to be skeptical. Most reform efforts fail, but this one didn't fail because people like you decided to help once you saw it was real. So thank you for giving it a chance." Wade shook his hand, and Jonathan saw something in the older officer's eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect. Real respect, earned through action rather than demanded through authority. That night, Jonathan and Sarah finally moved into a real apartment, their first permanent home in Chicago. As they unpacked boxes, Sarah found the cream-colored suit from that first day cleaned, but still showing faint stains where the blood had soaked in deepest. "You should frame this," she said, "like they do with jerseys or historic artifacts, because that's what this is, the uniform you wore when you changed everything." "That's dramatic," Jonathan said, but he was smiling. "It's true," Sarah insisted. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people will study what happened here. They'll write books about it. They'll teach it in police academies across the country, and they'll point to this moment as when everything changed." "I just did my job," Jonathan said. "You did more than that," Sarah replied. "You proved that one person can make a difference, that standing up to corruption even when it seems impossible can actually work. That's not just doing your job. That's being a hero." Jonathan looked at his reflection in the window, at the man with the crooked nose and the tired eyes who'd somehow managed to tear down a system that had seemed invincible. "I'm not a hero," he said quietly. "I'm just someone who got punched in the face and decided to punch back with the law instead of his fists." "That's exactly what a hero is," Sarah said. 6 months later, the Department of Justice released its findings. The Chicago Police Department had been systematically violating civil rights for over a decade. Hundreds of illegal arrests, dozens of planted evidence cases, a culture of corruption so deep it had infected every level of the organization. But the report also noted the unprecedented reforms implemented by Chief Jonathan Price, the aggressive prosecution of corrupt officers, and the transformation of a department that had been a national disgrace into a model for police reform. The report's final paragraph stayed with Jonathan. "What happened in Chicago proves that change is possible, but only when someone with courage and conviction is willing to pay the personal cost." Chief Price's sacrifice, his willingness to endure violence, character assassination, and institutional resistance demonstrates that reforming police culture requires not just policy changes, but moral leadership. Other cities should take note the path forward exists, but it demands leaders who value justice more than their own comfort. Jonathan read those words in his office, the same office where he'd planned the arrests, where he'd met with Dorothy Washington, where he'd made the decisions that had changed everything. His phone rang, an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Chief Price, this is Captain Williams from the Baltimore Police Department. I just read the DOJ report, and I was wondering if you might be willing to talk. We have our own problems here, and we need someone who knows how to fix them. Someone who's done it before." Jonathan looked out his window at the city he'd fought so hard to protect, at the streets that were a little bit safer now, at the communities that were starting to trust their police again. "Captain Williams," he said, "I'd be happy to talk, because this fight doesn't end in Chicago, it's just beginning." 1 year after that first morning, Jonathan stood at a podium in City Hall for a very different kind of press conference. Behind him stood Dorothy Washington officer Rivera Morrison Castellanos and 24 community leaders who'd supported the reforms. "When I arrived in Chicago," Jonathan began, "I expected to find a broken system. What I found was worse, a system that was working exactly as designed, protecting the powerful and punishing the powerless. But today, I'm proud to say that system no longer exists. He gestured to the people behind him. These are the real heroes of this story, the families who refused to give up seeking justice, the officers who chose integrity over loyalty to corruption, the investigators who built the cases that couldn't be ignored, the community leaders who kept faith that change was possible. I just happened to be the person who got punched in the face on camera, which gave everyone permission to care about what had been happening in the shadows for years. A reporter raised her hand. Chief Price, your reforms have been adopted by 17 other cities. You're being called the face of police reform in America. How does that feel? Heavy, Jonathan said honestly. Because for every city that reforms, there are hundreds that haven't. For every corrupt officer we prosecute, there are thousands still out there. This isn't a victory lap. This is a progress report, and the work continues. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed, Dorothy Washington approached him one last time. Chief Price, she said, I want you to have something. She handed him a photograph. A young man 17 years old in a high school graduation gown, smiling at the camera with his whole life ahead of him. This is Marcus, she said. Before they took him from me. I want you to keep this, because when you go to those other cities, when you fight those other battles, I want you to remember why you're doing it. Every Marcus in every city deserves someone like you fighting for them. Jonathan took the photograph with trembling hands. Mrs. Washington, I don't know what to say. Say you won't stop, she said. Say you'll keep fighting until every police department in this country remembers that they're supposed to serve people, not rule them. Say you'll make Marcus's death mean something. I promise, Jonathan said. I won't stop until the system that killed him is dead everywhere. That night, Jonathan placed Marcus Washington's photograph on his desk next to a small frame containing a piece of fabric, the blood-stained silk from his cream-colored suit preserved as a reminder. A reminder that change requires sacrifice, that justice demands courage, that reform is possible when someone cares enough to pay the price. Sarah found him there hours later, staring at those two objects, lost in thought. Come to bed, she said gently. You've got a meeting with the Seattle police chief tomorrow. They want to know how you did it. How I did what? Jonathan asked. How you survived, Sarah said. How you won. How you changed something everyone said was unchangeable. Jonathan touched his crooked nose, felt the slight ache in his ribs that would probably never completely go away, thought about the threats and the lies and the endless battles. I didn't do anything special, he said finally. I just refused to accept that corruption was inevitable. I refused to believe that the system couldn't be fixed, and when they tried to break me, I broke them first. Not with violence, with truth, with accountability, with the radical idea that police should actually face consequences for breaking the law they're supposed to enforce. That is special, Sarah said. That's revolutionary. As they left his office, turning off the lights, Jonathan took one last look at Marcus Washington's photograph and the blood-stained silk, two symbols of everything this year had cost and everything it had accomplished. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over, not as long as power existed without accountability, not as long as badges could be used as weapons instead of symbols of service. But the fight was winnable. Jonathan had proved that. One broken nose, one corrupt department, one city at a time. And tomorrow he'd prove it again, because that's what leaders do. They don't quit when it gets hard. They don't compromise when it matters most. They stand in the fire and refuse to burn. And by their example, they show others that standing up is possible, that change is achievable, that justice isn't just a dream, but a choice we make every single day. Jonathan Price had made that choice on a sidewalk outside the 9th Precinct when a corrupt officer's fist connected with his face, and he'd been making it every day since, would keep making it for as long as he wore the badge, would teach others to make it, until every department in America remembered what it meant to serve with honor. The badge didn't make you powerful. Your character did. Your integrity did. Your willingness to sacrifice your comfort for someone else's justice. That was the lesson written in blood on white silk, the truth bought with a broken nose and cracked ribs, and a year of fighting battles everyone said were unwinnable. And it was a lesson Jonathan Price would spend the rest of his career teaching, one department at a time, one officer at a time, until the old culture of corruption was nothing but a shameful memory, and police were finally truly servants of the people they'd been sworn to protect. That was the promise he'd made to Dorothy Washington Tamarcus, to every victim of police violence who'd never gotten justice. And Jonathan Pryce always kept his promises.